Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through the hidden prophecies and whispered predictions woven into the fabric of Hawkins, Indiana. Tonight, we'll explore together how Stranger Things has, from its very first moments, been quietly telling us what would come. As you settle into your comfortable space, let the gentle flow of this timeline carry you through layers of foreshadowing, symbolic warnings, and narrative breadcrumbs. Every season holds its secrets, its clues planted like seeds waiting to bloom in future episodes. So let's begin with the summer of 1983, when a boy disappeared and a universe of predictions started unfolding. In the autumn of 1983, when Stranger Things first introduced audiences to Hawkins, Indiana, the series began laying groundwork for predictions that would echo across years. These early episodes, seemingly focused on immediate mystery, contained within them the DNA of everything that would follow. The Duffer Brothers, crafting their opening salvo, embedded prophecies that would require multiple seasons to fully manifest, creating a prophetic architecture as carefully constructed as the sets themselves. The series opened with words that proved more literal than audiences initially understood. Mike Wheeler's Dungeons & Dragons campaign narration in the pilot episode described a threat that was coming, something hungry for blood, a shadow that grows in the deep. This description, delivered in a basement surrounded by friends who would face real interdimensional horror, established the show's central prophetic technique. Fantasy games would predict reality. The Demogorgon of Mike's campaign wasn't metaphor, but preview, a narrative device that would recur throughout the series as character imagination consistently foreshadowed actual threats. Will Byers' disappearance on November 6, 1983, contained prophecies beyond the obvious investigation storyline. His vanishing established a pattern that would define his character across 4 seasons and counting. The moment he was taken into the Upside Down created a connection that would never fully sever. Season 2 would see him possessed by the Mind Flayer. Season 3 would show his continued sensitivity to the creature's presence. Season 4 revealed his ongoing supernatural awareness through neck-tingling sensitivity. The pilot episode's central event predicted that Will would remain tethered to the alternate dimension permanently, his body a conduit between worlds, his artistic sensitivity translating into psychic perception. Joyce Byers' Christmas Lights communication system demonstrated innovation born from maternal desperation, but it also established symbolic language that would resonate throughout the series. Her alphabet painted on the wall, lights flickering to spell out messages from her trapped son, created visual metaphor for the series' core theme. Communication across impossible divides would recur constantly. The lights predicted not just Will's rescue, but future struggles to bridge dimensional gaps, to translate between realities, to maintain connection despite separation. By season 4, when characters used light-based Morse code to communicate between Hawkins and the Upside Down, they were fulfilling prophecies Joyce had established in her living room. 11's introduction carried within it the entire trajectory of her multi-season arc. The girl who emerged from the woods, soaking wet and terrified, wearing a hospital gown and sporting a shaved head, contained prophecies in every detail. Her extremely limited vocabulary, her inability to navigate social conventions, her confusion about family structures, all predicted the identity journey that would define seasons of development. The first time she said, "Friends don't lie" to Mike, she established both a personal mantra and a thematic through line that would test characters repeatedly. Lying, truth-telling, and the tension between protection and honesty would become central conflicts, all predicted by those 3 words in episode 2. Her powers, demonstrated first through small manipulations of Mike's toys, and then through increasingly dramatic telekinetic displays, carried their own predictions. The pattern was established early. 11 would use her abilities, experience physical consequences, particularly nosebleeds, and eventually exhaust herself completely. This cycle predicted not just immediate plot mechanics, but the long-term arc of power loss and restoration that would drive Season 3 and Season 4's narratives. When she made the Demogorgon disintegrate in the Season 1 finale, apparently sacrificing herself in the process, the show telegraphed that her powers came with costs that would accumulate across seasons. The relationship between Eleven and Dr. Brenner established father-figure dynamics that would haunt her search for belonging. His insistence that she call him Papa, his mixture of affection and experimentation, his possessive control masked as care, all predicted her later struggles with Hopper's adoption and protective instincts. The trauma of false family would make true family harder to accept. Brenner's death in Season 1, apparently definitive, proved temporary when he returned in Season 4, demonstrating that the series had predicted even its own resurrections. Nothing in Hawkins stayed buried, whether monsters or manipulative father figures. The friendship dynamics established in Season 1 contain their own predictive patterns. Mike's immediate devotion to Eleven, protective and romantic from their first encounter, predicted the relationship obstacles they would face across seasons. His tendency toward jealousy, his need for proximity, his fear of loss, all emerged in those early episodes and would create conflicts in every subsequent season. Lucas's skepticism about Eleven, his pragmatic questioning of her trustworthiness, established him as the group's voice of caution, a role that would define his character even as he learned to balance skepticism with faith. Dustin's scientific curiosity and social awkwardness predicted his role as the group's researcher and comic relief. His excitement about AV Club equipment in early episodes foreshadowed his Season 2 radio tower heroics. His openness to D'Artagnan, the baby Demogorgon he would adopt in Season 2, was predicted by his willingness to believe in Eleven despite her strangeness. His eventual long-distance relationship with Susie, seemingly implausible given his social struggles, was actually foreshadowed by his loyalty and his ability to find connection in unexpected places. The kid who befriended the girl from the lab would naturally find love with the genius from Utah. The Upside Down's visual design, revealed gradually across Season 1's 8 episodes, contained architectural prophecies. This alternate dimension, a dark mirror of Hawkins, frozen in decay and filled with floating particles, established aesthetic and conceptual frameworks that later seasons would expand. The vines that Will became entangled in predicted the tunnel system of Season 2. The organic pulsing walls suggested biological rather than purely dimensional horror, foreshadowing the Mind Flayer's hive mind control. Most significantly, the Upside Down's resemblance to Hawkins predicted Season 4's revelation that this dimension was frozen at the moment of Eleven's first gate opening. The mirror world contained temporal prophecies within its spatial distortion. The Demogorgon's behavior patterns established creature design philosophy that would carry through all subsequent monsters. It hunted based on blood, responding to injury with predatory focus. It operated with animal intelligence rather than malevolence, driven by hunger rather than hatred. This characteristic would distinguish it from later, more intentional threats. The Mind Flayer of Season 2 and 3 showed intelligence and strategy. Vecna in Season 4 revealed conscious cruelty and personal vendettas. The Demogorgon's simplicity predicted these escalations by establishing a baseline. Threats would grow more sophisticated, more personal, more deliberately evil as the series progressed. Nancy Wheeler's journey from popular girl to monster hunter began with personal tragedy that predicted her character evolution. Barb Holland's disappearance and death, occurring at Nancy's pool party while Nancy was upstairs with Steve, created guilt that would drive Nancy's actions for seasons. Her refusal to accept easy explanations, her determination to expose the truth about Barb's fate, her willingness to arm herself and enter dangerous situations, all emerged from this foundational loss. Season 1 predicted that Nancy would become the group's warrior journalist, someone who investigated monsters, both literal and institutional. Her Season 4 role as the one who learned Vecna's origin story fulfilled prophecies planted when she first picked up Jonathan's monster photos. Jonathan Byers' role as photographer established him as documenter and observer, someone who captured truth through lenses. His early photos of the creature, dismissed and destroyed by authorities, predicted his ongoing position as someone who sees but isn't believed, who provides evidence that others deny. His artistic outsider status, his working-class struggles, his family responsibility for Will, all predicted his romantic partnership with Nancy. They were both people who wouldn't stop investigating, who refused comfort when truth was at stake, who would choose difficult knowledge over pleasant ignorance. Steve Harrington's character contained perhaps Season 1's most subtle prophecy. His introduction, as typical jock boyfriend, concerned primarily with popularity and social status, seemed to establish him as temporary character. Nancy's soon-to-be ex, comic relief at best. His cruelty toward Jonathan, his casual dismissal of Nancy's concerns, his performance of shallow masculinity, all suggested limited narrative utility. Yet his redemption arc, beginning when he returned to the Byers' house to help fight the Demogorgon, predicted one of television's most beloved character transformations. His evolution from popular jerk to protective babysitter to surrogate older brother would span 4 seasons, but it was predicted the moment he grabbed that nail-studded baseball bat. Steve was always going to be a hero. Season 1 just made audiences wait to see it. Hopper's backstory, revealed through strategic flashbacks to his daughter Sarah's death from cancer, predicted his entire relationship with Eleven. His trauma, his substance abuse, his isolation, his fury at powerlessness in the face of his child's mortality, all pointed toward his need for redemption through protection. When he discovered Eleven and eventually took her in, becoming her legal guardian by Season 2, he was fulfilling prophecies embedded in those hospital flashbacks. The chief who couldn't save his daughter would save someone else's. His eventual, apparent death in Season 3, sacrificing himself to close the gate, completed an arc that began with survivor's guilt in Season 1. That he survived even that sacrifice, returning in Season 4 from Russian imprisonment, demonstrated how thoroughly the show had predicted his role as unkillable protector. The gate in Hawkins' lab, pulsing and organic, resembling both wound and portal, established visual language for dimensional breaches that would recur across seasons. Its location beneath government facility predicted the institutional complicity that would complicate every subsequent crisis. The military-industrial complex wasn't innocent bystander, but active participant in Hawkins' horrors. This gate's existence predicted Season 2's tunnels spreading underground, Season 3's Russians attempting to force open new gates, and Season 4's multiple gates converging into massive rift. The first breach contained all future violations, demonstrating that dimensional barriers, once compromised, would never fully restore themselves. The series' final image of Season 1, 11 apparently dissolving into particles as she destroyed the Demogorgon, established a resurrection pattern that would become signature. Characters would sacrifice themselves, apparently dying, only to return transformed. 11 came back in Season 2 stronger and more independent. Hopper would return from apparent death in Season 3 through Season 4's Russian prison revelation. Even Will, seemingly rescued definitively at Season 1's conclusion, would return to crisis in Season 2's possession. Hawkins didn't allow clean endings. Every resolution predicted future complications. Every rescue predicted future danger. Every death predicted eventual return. These foundational predictions, carefully planted throughout Season 1's 8 episodes, established patterns that would define the series' approach to narrative prophecy. The Byers family's Christmas lights, initially a desperate mother's innovation, would evolve into a broader symbol of communication across impossible divides. Eleven's sacrifice, seemingly final, planted seeds for her return and transformation. Most significantly, the gate's brief opening demonstrated that Hawkins' connection to the Upside Down would prove neither simple nor easily severed. The series had trained its audience in its prophetic language, teaching viewers to read signs, to trust patterns, to understand that every detail mattered. Nothing was decorative, everything predicted. As 1983 gave way to 1984, these early predictions began bearing fruit. The consequences of that first gate opening would ripple through Hawkins in ways both expected and surprising. Season 2 would not only fulfill Season 1's promises, but plant its own seeds for futures yet to unfold. The show had established that it knew its destination, that it was building towards something larger than individual season arcs, that patient viewers would be rewarded for attention to detail. The prophecies continued, multiplying and deepening as Hawkins approached its next Halloween. The fall of 1984 brought Halloween to Hawkins, along with shadows that stretched far beyond that single autumn. Season 2, subtitled in production materials but not on screen, operated on dual levels, resolving mysteries from the previous year while simultaneously embedding predictions that would take years to fully manifest. The 9 episodes released in October 2027 demonstrated the Duffer Brothers' increasing sophistication in prophetic storytelling, layering foreshadowing so thoroughly that nearly every scene contained seeds of future harvests. Will Byers returned from the Upside Down, fundamentally changed, carrying within him connections that transcended simple survival. His visions, initially dismissed as post-traumatic stress, proved to be genuine psychic links to the alternate dimension. The concept introduced in Episode 1, which Will called Now Memories, established temporal complexity that would resonate across subsequent seasons. These weren't flashbacks, but present moment perceptions of events occurring simultaneously in another dimension. The terminology predicted narrative structures that would become crucial in Season 4, when characters would need to operate across multiple timelines and realities simultaneously, coordinating actions between Hawkins and the Upside Down with split-second precision. The Mind Flayer's emergence as Season 2's primary threat transformed the series' mythology from creature feature to cosmic horror. Will's drawings covering his mother's walls with ever-expanding tentacled forms visually predicted not just the entity's appearance, but its fundamental nature. This wasn't another Demogorgon, another animal predator responding to blood and hunger. This was intelligence, strategy, malevolence with purpose. The shadow creature that possessed Will operated through hive mind control, infecting hosts and coordinating them toward unified goals. This characteristic predicted Season 3's meat monster, the flayed humans operating as collective organism. More significantly, it predicted Season 4's revelation that the Mind Flayer had always been tool rather than master, weapon wielded by human intelligence transformed into something darker. Will's possession arc carried prophecies in its mechanics and imagery. The creature entered through his mouth during a Halloween night vision, invading through vulnerability, exploiting trauma, colonizing the body of someone already marked by previous upside-down exposure. This pattern of possession through existing wounds would echo in Season 3's flayed victims, who were selected based on proximity to previous invasions. Billy Hargrove, possessed in Season 3, had been present during Season 2's tunnel burning. The Mind Flayer, it seemed, marked its targets early and returned to claim them when strategically advantageous. Will's experience predicted that contact with the Upside Down created permanent vulnerability, that exposure was cumulative, that nobody touched by that dimension would escape its long-term consequences. Joyce's fierce protection of Will, her refusal to accept easy medical explanations. Her insistence that something supernatural was affecting her son continued patterns from season 1 while predicting her future role. She remained the character whose maternal instinct overrode skepticism, whose immediate belief in impossible things made her the group's emotional anchor. Her relationship with Bob Newby, Hawkins High's former AV Club founder turned Radio Shack manager, introduced romantic complications that would recur in later seasons. Bob represented normal life, safe choices, retreat from the supernatural chaos that had consumed the Byers family. His gentle encouragement of Will, particularly the scene where he shared his own childhood fears and how he overcame them, established him as father figure and protector. Bob's death in episode 8 proved devastating precisely because the show had made audiences love him first. His heroism descending into the infested Hawkins lab basement to restore power, succeeding in his mission only to be torn apart by demodogs as Joyce and the kids watched helplessly, established a sacrifice pattern that would recur. The series demonstrated that it would kill beloved characters, that heroism didn't guarantee survival, that courage often led to tragedy. This death predicted Eddie Munson's fate in season 4 with remarkable precision. Both were characters introduced in their respective seasons. Both won audience affection through genuine kindness and unlikely heroism. Both died saving others, while the group escaped. Both perished just steps from safety. Bob's death was blueprint for future sacrifices, prophecy for how the show would handle heroic deaths throughout its run. Max Mayfield's arrival as the new kid from California brought complications that would take seasons to fully unfold. Her skateboarding entrance, her arcade game mastery, her resistance to the party's attempts to befriend her, all established her as someone protecting herself through aggressive independence. The boys' immediate interest in her, particularly Lucas and Dustin's competition for her attention, created romantic tensions while, more importantly, establishing Max as someone who disrupted existing dynamics. Her insistence on being included, on earning party membership rather than accepting token inclusion, predicted her eventual centrality to the group's survival. Her home life, revealed gradually through careful scenes, carried dark predictions. Billy Hargrove, her stepbrother, demonstrated abusive behavior from his first appearance. His aggression toward Max, his racist hostility toward Lucas, his violent threats masked as protective concern, all pointed toward deeper trauma. The show planted seeds carefully. Billy's fear of his father, revealed in key scenes, explained but didn't excuse his cruelty. His objectification, through frequent shirtless scenes, presented initially as fan service, actually predicted Season 3's revelation that he was victim before becoming victimizer. Most significantly, his targeting by the Mind Flayer in Season 3, his possession and eventual redemptive sacrifice were predicted by Season 2's careful character construction. The show introduced him as villain while embedding humanity that would later complicate simple moral judgments. Eleven's journey in Season 2 operated almost as separate narrative, particularly in Episode 7, The Lost Sister, which transported her to Chicago and introduced Carly, another Hawkins Lab survivor who had escaped as number 8. This episode, controversial among fans for breaking the season's momentum, proved prophetic in multiple ways. It demonstrated that 11 wasn't unique, that Brenner had created multiple children with various abilities, that a larger world of experimental survivors existed beyond Hawkins. This predicted Season 4's revelations about the Rainbow Room, about the full scope of Brenner's experiments, about 11's childhood, among other numbered children, who would prove crucial to understanding Vecna's origin. Kaylee's powers of illusion contrasted with 11's telekinesis, demonstrating that abilities varied widely among test subjects. Her philosophy, her insistence that 11 could be stronger through anger, her mission of revenge against those who had hurt them, offered tempting path that Eleven ultimately rejected. This choice predicted Eleven's character arc across remaining seasons. She would choose love over hate, protection over revenge, family over isolation. The brief time with Carly showed Eleven who she could become if she embraced darkness, making her return to Hopper and her friends a conscious decision rather than default option. She chose her path knowing alternatives existed. Hopper's adoption of Eleven, formalized legally by Season 2's end but practiced throughout the season in his cabin, fulfilled predictions from Season 1 while creating new ones. His rules written and posted, his struggle with parenting a superpowered teenager, his overprotective restrictions born from trauma, all predicted the conflicts that would drive Season 3's storyline. Eleven's cabin fever, her desperation to see Mike, her eventual rebellion against Hopper's limitations were all predicted by Season 2's setup. The father-daughter relationship, beautiful and dysfunctional in equal measure, would require Hopper's apparent death in Season 3 to make Eleven appreciate what she'd had, to make their Season 4 reunion emotionally devastating. The tunnel system discovered beneath Hawkins demonstrated the Upside Down's expanding presence. These organic passages, spreading like infection beneath the town, pulsing with biological horror, predicted the geography that would become increasingly important in later seasons. They established that the Upside Down wasn't separate dimension accessed only through gates, but invading presence spreading through Hawkins like roots through soil. The tunnel maps that Will drew, covering walls with compulsive precision, showed the scope of infiltration while predicting his continued psychic connection. He would remain sensitive to upside-down presence across all subsequent seasons, his neck tingling whenever the dimension pressed close to reality. Dustin's adoption of D'Artagnan, the creature he discovered in his trash can, and nurtured despite growing evidence of its dangerous nature, provided both comic relief and serious prophecy. Dart's transformation from apparent tadpole to juvenile demogorgon demonstrated the creature's life cycle, revealing that the full-grown monster from Season 1 had originated as something small and vulnerable. This biological understanding predicted the Mind Flayer's strategy in Season 3, creating the meat monster from accumulated biomass, demonstrating that the Upside Down's creatures could be engineered and assembled rather than simply manifesting fully formed. More significantly, Dart's recognition of Dustin in the tunnels, his choice to let the group pass based on remembered affection, predicted that even upside-down creatures retained some capacity for connection, that biology wasn't destiny, that kindness could create bonds across species boundaries. Steve Harrington's evolution continued through his unlikely friendship with Dustin. Their dynamic, the former popular kid and the nerdy middle schooler forming genuine bond, predicted Steve's role across remaining seasons. He became the babysitter, the protector, the older brother figure who shepherded younger characters through danger. His relationship with Nancy ended as she chose Jonathan, forcing Steve to define himself beyond romantic partnership. This loss paradoxically freed him to become the character audiences loved most, demonstrating that the show predicted growth through heartbreak, that losing what you wanted could lead to becoming who you needed to be. Nancy and Jonathan's relationship deepened through their investigation into Hawkins' lab, their infiltration of facilities, their exposure of institutional corruption. Murray Bauman's involvement, the conspiracy theorist who turned out to be correct about government cover-ups, added adult ally whose paranoia proved justified. His truth serum scene, getting Nancy and Jonathan drunk to force honest conversation about their feelings, predicted his role as truth-teller and facilitator. Murray would recur in Season 3 and 4, translating languages, exposing lies, pushing characters toward honesty they avoided. His introduction established him as catalyst, someone whose interventions accelerated narratives toward inevitable conclusions. The laboratory's infiltration by demodogs during Episode 8's climactic sequence demonstrated that Hawkins' lab's security, despite military backing and government resources, couldn't contain threats they'd unleashed. This predicted Season 3's similar failure when Russians attempted their own gate experiments. Institutional authority consistently proved inadequate against upside-down threats, a pattern that would recur through Season 4's incompetent military response. The show predicted that adults in power would fail repeatedly, that kids would save the day while being disbelieved, that official responses would range from denial to disastrous intervention. Lucas and Max's relationship, developing across the season, despite Billy's threats and initial party resistance, provided emotional grounding while predicting Season 3 and 4's developments. Their snowball kiss, sweet and tentative, established them as a couple who would face challenges together. Max's choice of Lucas despite her stepbrother's racism, her defense of him against Billy's violence, predicted her loyalty and courage. Their relationship struggles in Season 3, breaking up and reconciling repeatedly, were predicted by the difficulty of their Season 2 beginning. They were always going to be complicated, always going to choose each other eventually, always going to demonstrate that young love could survive supernatural horror and personal trauma. Mike and Eleven's reunion, after nearly a year of separation, fulfilled Season 1's romantic predictions, while setting up Season 3's conflicts. Their immediate reconnection, their desperate clinging to each other, predicted the obsessive quality their relationship would take in Season 3. Hopper's frustration with their constant kissing, his concern about Eleven's isolation, with Mike as sole focus, all emerged from patterns established during Season 2's emotional reunion. The show predicted that intense young love would create problems even as it provided motivation for heroism. Will's continued struggles, even after the Mind Flayer's apparent expulsion from his body, predicted his arc across remaining seasons. The possession left marks that wouldn't fade. His awareness of the Mind Flayer's continued existence, his ability to sense when the creature was near, established him as early warning system. Season 3 would rely on his sensitivity to detect the Mind Flayer's return. Season 4 would use his perceptions to understand Vecna's presence. The boy who was taken in Season 1 would never fully return, remaining permanently attuned to threats from the alternate dimension. This prediction proved both burden and gift, trauma and utility, demonstrating the show's nuanced approach to lasting consequences. The snowball sequence that concluded Season 2 represented peak happiness before darkness returned. Every character paired off in age-appropriate romance. The gymnasium was decorated in pastels and balloons. The music swelled with period-appropriate pop optimism. This moment of joy predicted the pattern that would recur throughout the series. Happiness preceded horror. Calm predicted storm. Every moment of genuine contentment carried within it the shadow of coming threats. The final shot of Season 2, pulling back from the snowball's celebration to show the Mind Flayer looming over Hawkins in the Upside Down, made the prediction explicit. The threat hadn't ended but merely withdrawn, preparing for future invasion. Nancy's transformation from girlfriend to warrior journalist reached new heights in Season 2's resolution. Her determination to expose the truth about Barb's death, her manipulation of government officials to achieve justice, her refusal to accept cover stories and hush money, all predicted her Season 4 role investigating Victor Creel's history. She was always going to be the one who uncovered backstories, who researched historical context, who found patterns in past events that explained present crises. Her investigative instincts, sharpened through Season 2's laboratory expose, would prove crucial when understanding Vecna's origins became essential to defeating him. Season 2's structure itself carried prophecies about how the series would develop. The 9-episode format, expanded from Season 1's 8, allowed for the Lost Sister interlude and deeper character exploration. This predicted Season 3's 8-episode return to tighter pacing and Season 4's massive expansion to 18 episodes split across 2 volumes. The series demonstrated flexibility with format, willingness to adjust structure to serve story needs, suggesting that Season 5's final chapter would similarly adapt its shape to narrative requirements. The Bob Newby character arc, complete from introduction to heroic death within 9 episodes, established templates for how the show would handle seasonal characters. Introduce someone likable, develop them enough to matter emotionally, then sacrifice them for narrative impact and character development consequences. This pattern would recur with Alexei in Season 3 and Eddie in Season 4. The series had learned that killing off characters introduced that same season allowed for emotional impact without disrupting core cast dynamics, prophecy of how it would continue generating stakes across remaining seasons. Season 2's conclusions marked both endings and beginnings. The Mind Flayer's defeat proved temporary, as the final scene's shadow looming over the snowball demonstrated with visual clarity. Will's trauma, while addressed through the makeshift exorcism in the buyer's shed, would leave scars that future seasons would explore. Bob's heroic death established that the show's body count would include genuinely good people, not just expendable characters. These 9 episodes created prophetic architecture far more complex than Season 1's foundation, planting seeds that would require multiple seasons to fully bloom. The show had learned to predict its own future with increasing sophistication, to layer foreshadowing so densely that every scene rewarded attention, to trust audiences, to track connections across years of storytelling. The year between Season 2's snowball and Season 3's summer would pass for audiences, but not for Hawkins. When the story resumed in July 1985, the predictions planted across 2 seasons would begin their harvest. Fulfillment would accelerate, and new prophecies would emerge from the intersection of mall capitalism and interdimensional horror. The series had demonstrated its commitment to long-term planning, its ability to maintain coherent mythology across expanding scope, its dedication to making every detail matter eventually. Summer arrived in Hawkins in 1985 with heat, neon, and the grand opening of Starcourt Mall. Season 3's 8 episodes, bathed in artificial light and pop music, masked their prophetic darkness beneath consumer culture's bright surface. These summer months would prove that predictions could hide in plain sight, wrapped in nostalgia and optimism. The Duffer Brothers constructed their most deceptive season yet, disguising horror as commerce, embedding warnings in advertisements, turning capitalism itself into vector for invasion. Starcourt Mall represented more than setting or plot device. Its construction and opening carried symbolic weight that would resonate through the season's themes and into future revelations. The mall destroyed small businesses, including Radio Shack, where Bob Newby had worked, suggesting that progress devoured memory, that modernization erased the past. This commercial colonization mirrored the Upside Down's biological invasion, both forces spreading through Hawkins and consuming what had existed before. The Russians building their secret base beneath the mall, literally undermining American capitalism to access the gate's location, added Cold War paranoia to consumer satire. The mall's bright facade concealed darker purposes, a pattern that extended beyond architecture to character, plot, and thematic structure. Billy Hargrove's possession by the Mind Flayer fulfilled prophecies planted in Season 2 while establishing new patterns for how the entity operated. His selection as host wasn't random but strategic. The Mind Flayer chose Billy specifically, targeting him while he worked as Starcourt's pool lifeguard, pulling him from his car on a rain-soaked night. The possession scene, the creature reaching through him, invading through his mouth, just as it had with Will, demonstrated learned behaviour. The Mind Flayer had refined its techniques, understood how to maintain control over hosts while keeping them functional enough to pass as human during daylight hours. Billy's transformation from aggressive stepbrother to Mind Flayer puppet revealed layers of tragedy that Season 2 had carefully prepared. His memories, particularly the beach scenes from California that recurred throughout his possession, showed that beneath his cruelty existed a child who had once been happy, who remembered sunlight and safety before his father's abuse shaped him into something harder. These flashbacks served as prophecy for Season 4's approach to villain origin stories. Vecna's backstory would similarly reveal that monsters were made through trauma, that evil emerged from pain, that understanding villains required excavating their buried humanity. Billy's final moments, breaking through the Mind Flayer's control to protect Max and Eleven, demonstrated that redemption remained possible even for those who had caused harm. His sacrifice predicted Eddie Munson's heroic death in structure and emotional impact, proving the show had developed a formula for transforming antagonists into tragic heroes through final acts of courage. The Mind Flayer's strategy in Season 3 represented evolution from its Season 2 approach. Rather than possessing a single host, it built an army of the flayed, infecting multiple Hawkins residents and coordinating them as Hive Mind Collective. This escalation fulfilled Season 2's demonstration of the creature's intelligence while predicting Season 4's revelation about Vecna's control. The flayed humans, working together to construct the meat monster in the abandoned steel mill, showed that the Mind Flayer could weaponize biology itself, assembling mass from accumulated victims into grotesque war machine. This body horror, the liquefied humans merging into single entity, pushed the series' violence to new extremes, while predicting that future seasons would continue escalating threat levels and visceral imagery. Eleven's loss of powers during the Season 3 finale represented more than temporary setback. When the piece of the Mind Flayer lodged in her leg, when she extracted it through desperate telekinesis, when she attempted to use her abilities afterward and found only pain and blood without results, the show fundamentally altered its power dynamics. Season 1 and 2 had established Eleven as the group's ultimate weapon, the one who could face threats that others couldn't. Her powerlessness in Season 3's conclusion and throughout Season 4's first half forced narrative adaptation. The group would need to rely on strategy, teamwork, and conventional weapons rather than supernatural intervention. This change predicted Season 4's emphasis on human vulnerability, on characters facing Vecna without reliable supernatural protection, on victory requiring sacrifice rather than simple power application. Hopper's apparent death, stepping into the explosion's path as Joyce destroyed the Russian machine, represented the season's most significant prophetic moment. His vaporization seemed definitive. No body remained. The blast left nothing but scorched platform. Yet the mid-credits scene, showing a Russian prison camp and guards referring to the American in their cells, immediately complicated that narrative closure. This fake-out death predicted the series' approach to major character mortality. The show would make audiences believe in permanent loss before revealing survival through unlikely circumstances. More significantly, Hopper's letter to Eleven, read by Joyce at the buyer's home as the family prepared to leave Hawkins, contained emotional prophecies that would guide their relationship through separation and reunion. The letter's content, Hopper's awkward attempt to express love and guidance, demonstrated character growth from the isolated, angry man of Season 1 to someone capable of vulnerability and parental devotion. His acknowledgement of Eleven's need for independence, his acceptance that she was growing beyond his protection, his expression of pride in who she was becoming, all predicted the evolution their relationship would undergo through forced separation. When they reunited in Season 4, after Hopper's imprisonment and 11's powerless struggles, they would appreciate each other differently, understanding what they'd taken for granted. The letter served as time capsule, preserving Hopper's pre-loss self, allowing comparison between the man who wrote those words and the traumatized survivor who would return from Soviet captivity. The Byers family's departure from Hawkins, forced by the attention their involvement in supernatural events had attracted, and by Joyce's need to escape memories of Bob and Hopper, scattered the core group geographically. This separation predicted Season 4's narrative structure, which would split the action across multiple locations and force characters to operate independently. Will, Jonathan, and 11 would face California challenges, while Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Max dealt with Hawkins' crises. The friendship that had always been the series' emotional core would need to function across distance, maintaining bonds despite separation. This geographic division also predicted thematic explorations of how relationships endure through change, how growing up means growing apart, how love persists even when daily proximity ends. Max and 11's friendship, developing rapidly, once 11 broke free from Hopper's cabin restrictions, provided the season's brightest moments while predicting Season 4's darkest. Their mall shopping sequences, their makeover montages, their giggly rejection of Mike and Lucas's attention, all demonstrated female friendship's importance in a series that had initially centered male dynamics. Max taught 11 about autonomy, about choosing her own preferences rather than accepting Mike's or Hopper's definitions of who she should be. This guidance would prove crucial in Season 4, when Max faced Vecna's attacks. The bond they formed through Season 3's summer fun became the foundation for 11's desperate attempts to save Max from possession, coma, and death. Their friendship predicted that Season 4's emotional stakes would centre on girls protecting each other, on female characters driving narrative, rather than reacting to male choices. Dustin's relationship with Susie, revealed through dramatic radio conversations and culminating in their duet of The Never-Ending Story during the season's climax, fulfilled Season 2's predictions about his capacity for long-distance romance while creating new prophecies. The group's initial skepticism about Susie's existence, their assumption that Dustin had invented a girlfriend to save face, demonstrated the series' self-awareness about its own conventions. When Susie proved real, when her knowledge of Planck's constant provided the crucial information needed to access the Russian base, the show validated Dustin's consistent role as the friend whose scientific interests and unlikely connections saved the day. This pattern would continue into Season 4, where Dustin's radio communications would again prove essential to coordinating the group's multi-location battle plans. Steve and Robin's friendship, forged through Scoops Ahoy employment and Russian torture, represented the season's most significant character development. Their dynamic, initially suggesting romantic possibility, subverted expectations when Robin came out to Steve in the mall bathroom after their escape. This scene, tender and honest, established that the show could handle LGBTQ+ representation with nuance and heart. Robin's revelation that she had a crush on Tammy Thompson, not Steve, recontextualized her Season 3 behavior while predicting her Season 4 romance with Vicky. More importantly, Steve's immediate acceptance, his pivot from potential romantic partner to supportive friend without hesitation or awkwardness, demonstrated his continued character evolution. The former popular kid who had bullied and excluded now embraced others' authenticity with genuine warmth. Their torture sequence, bound in Russian facility while soldiers attempted to extract information through drugs and violence, provided both comic relief through Steve's drug-induced rambling and serious stakes through genuine danger. The truth serum scene, where Steve confessed his feelings to Robin while high, allowed vulnerability that sober conversation might have prevented. This forced honesty through chemical intervention mirrored Murray's drunken truth-telling session with Nancy and Jonathan in Season 2, establishing a pattern where characters needed external catalysts to express authentic emotions. The series predicted through these scenes that its characters would struggle with direct communication, that breakthrough moments would require unusual circumstances, that growing up meant learning to say what you felt without requiring drugging or alcohol to lower inhibitions. The Russian subplot, initially seeming disconnected from the supernatural horror, revealed itself as deeply integrated with the series' mythology. The Soviet scientists weren't independent operators, but responding to the same dimensional weaknesses that had drawn Hawkins' lab's experiments. Their attempt to force open a new gate beneath Starcourt demonstrated that knowledge about the Upside Down had spread internationally, that multiple governments now competed for access to this power source. This prediction would extend into Season 4's revelations about the global scope of interest in the Upside Down, about prison camps experimenting with captured creatures, about nations weaponizing interdimensional access. Season 3 expanded the series from small-town horror to international thriller, predicting that future seasons would need to address the geopolitical implications of Hawkins' repeated invasions. Murray's involvement in the Russian infiltration, translating languages and providing adult supervision for Steve and Robin's espionage, continued his role as unlikely hero. His conspiracy theorist instincts, vindicated through Season 2's laboratory exposure, proved useful again when facing actual Soviet operations. His relationship with Alexei, the captured Russian scientist who provided crucial intelligence, added genuine pathos to what could have been purely functional character. Alexei's enthusiasm for American culture, his love of Looney Tunes and cherry slushies, his childlike joy in carnival games, all made his death devastating. When he was shot by a Russian assassin at the 4th of July fair, just moments after winning a Woody Woodpecker stuffed animal, the season demonstrated again its willingness to kill characters audiences had grown to love. Alexei's death predicted the series' continued use of lovable seasonal characters whose mortality would generate emotional impact without disrupting core cast dynamics. Like Bob in Season 2, Alexei existed only in Season 3, allowing the show to develop him thoroughly before sacrificing him for narrative purposes. His murder also served as tonal shift, the moment when the season's bright summer fun turned definitively dark, when the 4th of July celebration became background for violence and chase sequences. The holiday setting, America's Independence Day, corrupted by Soviet infiltration and interdimensional horror, added ironic commentary on nationalism, freedom, and the costs of victory. Joyce and Hopper's almost romance, building across the season through dinner plans, repeatedly disrupted by supernatural crises, provided adult relationship drama while predicting their eventual reunion. Their argument at Murray's bunker, where Joyce accused Hopper of being emotionally unavailable and Hopper defended his cautious approach to vulnerability, established the dynamic that would need resolution before they could function as couple. The date that never happened, Hopper's reservations at Enzo's, repeatedly cancelled by investigations and interventions, became symbol of how supernatural responsibility prevented normal life. Their interrupted romance predicted that Season 4's reunion would need to address unspoken feelings, that Hopper's survival and return would provide second chance at the relationship Season 3 had tantalized without delivering. Erica Sinclair's elevation from recurring background character to key player demonstrated the show's willingness to expand its ensemble in response to actor performance and audience reception. Her involvement in the Russian base infiltration, necessitated by the ventilation shaft's size, requiring someone small enough to crawl through, turned what could have been one scene gag into substantial character development. Her sass, her negotiation skills, demanding free ice cream, and ongoing suppliers' payment for cooperation, her unexpected bravery when faced with actual danger, all predicted her continued importance in Season 4. The younger generation, initially sidelined as the main group's siblings, would increasingly participate in supernatural confrontations as the series progressed. Lucas and Max's relationship struggles throughout Season 3. Their cycle of breaking up and reconciling provided both comic relief and genuine examination of young romance's volatility. Their conflicts, often petty and driven by miscommunication, demonstrated realistic teenage relationship dynamics while predicting the deeper connection they would need in Season 4. When Max faced Vecna's attacks, when she was targeted for her guilt and trauma, over Billy's death, Lucas's desperate attempts to save her would fulfill the devotion that Season 3's lighter moments had established. Their summer of casual dating predicted that they would become essential to each other's survival, that their bond would deepen through shared trauma rather than simple attraction. Mike and Eleven's relationship, Hopper's primary concern and source of frustration, demonstrated both the strength of their connection and the problems created by obsessive young love. Their constant kissing, their inability to spend time apart, their prioritization of couple time over group friendship, all created tensions within the party while predicting that they would need to learn healthier boundaries. Hopper's intervention, his threats to Mike, his insistence on spending time apart came from protective love, but employed controlling methods. The relationship dysfunction on both sides predicted Season 4's continued struggles, their difficulties with honest communication, Mike's inability to say, "I love you," despite clearly feeling it, Eleven's insecurity about whether Mike truly wanted her when she wasn't useful as supernatural weapon. Will's continued marginalization, his friends' lack of interest in Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, their prioritization of romantic relationships over the activities that had defined their childhood, created genuine sadness beneath the season's brightness. His outburst at Mike and Lucas, his destruction of Castle Byers in frustrated rage, his visible pain at being left behind as his friends matured into different priorities, all predicted themes that Season 4 would explore more fully. Will's difference from his friends, initially attributed to his upside-down trauma, but increasingly understood as connected to his sexuality, would become explicit through his Season 4 conversations with Mike and his painting's revelation. Season 3 showed him recognizing that he was growing in different direction from his friends, that he didn't share their romantic interests in girls, that he felt fundamentally separate from the heterosexual coupling that consumed their attention. The Battle of Starcourt, the season's climactic confrontation, bringing together all storylines in the mall's burning corridors, demonstrated the series' increasing ambition in staging large-scale action sequences. The various groups coordinated through Dustin's radio communications to attack the Mind Flayer from multiple angles, while Joyce and Hopper worked to destroy the Russian Gate. This multi-pronged approach predicted Season 4's even more complex battle coordination across multiple locations and dimensions. The victory came at tremendous cost. Billy died protecting Eleven and Max. Hopper apparently died destroying the machine. Dozens of Starcourt employees and shoppers had been flayed and killed in the Mind Flayer's construction project. The mall itself burned and was subsequently abandoned, becoming monument to the battle and the lives he lost. The season's epilogue, set 3 months later as the Byers family prepared to leave Hawkins, provided melancholy closure while opening doors for future complications. The Hawkins of Season 3's conclusion differed fundamentally from the town of the season's beginning. The mall stood empty and fire-damaged. The community had suffered losses that couldn't be explained publicly. The cover story about a mall fire killing 30 people couldn't account for the trauma experienced by those who knew the truth. This changed. Hawkins predicted that the town itself would become increasingly unstable, that repeated invasions would leave accumulating damage, physical and psychological, that eventually the supernatural chaos would become impossible to contain or deny. The final revelation of Hopper's survival in Russian captivity operated as both resolution and new mystery. How had he survived? Why hadn't he attempted to contact Joyce or Eleven? What experiments or torture had he endured during months of imprisonment? These questions would drive Season 4's Russia subplot, while predicting that explanations for impossible survival would stretch credulity. The show demonstrated its commitment to maintaining core cast even when narrative logic suggested permanent death, establishing pattern that would make audiences question any future apparent character deaths. Season 3's blend of bright aesthetics and dark content created tonal complexity that predicted the series' continued maturation. The show could handle summer romance and body horror, mall culture satire and Russian conspiracy, teenage relationship drama, and heroic sacrifice, all within 8 episodes without losing coherent voice. This tonal range would prove essential in Season 4's even more ambitious scope. Its ability to balance humour and horror, nostalgia and innovation, character development and plot progression. The prophecies embedded in Season 3's summer established that the series knew how to evolve while maintaining its essential identity, how to grow darker while preserving moments of light, how to honour its past while pushing toward more complex futures. Between summer 1985 and spring 1986, Hawkins would change profoundly. The mall stood abandoned, a monument to the battle fought within its neon corridors. When Season 4 arrived after nearly 3 years of production delays and pandemic interruptions, it would bring not just fulfillment of previous predictions, but a complete recontextualization of everything that came before, revealing that the series had been telling origin stories all along, that every supernatural threat had traced back to single source, that the prophecies extended deeper into the past than audiences had imagined possible. Spring 1986 brought Hawkins' darkest chapter yet, as Season 4's 18 episodes revealed that the show had been predicting its own origin story from the very beginning. Vecna's emergence transformed every previous season's predictions from setup to prologue. What audiences had interpreted as foreshadowing future events proved to be echoes of traumas already past. The Duffer Brothers had constructed their most ambitious narrative yet, splitting the massive season across 2 volumes released a month apart, allowing time for audiences to process revelations that fundamentally altered the series' mythology. The revelation of Henry Creel, also known as One, also known as Vecna, recontextualized 4 seasons of accumulated narrative. This wasn't new villain but the source of all previous threats. The Mind Flayer, presented in Season 2 as ancient cosmic entity, proved to be Henry's creation, shaped from upside-down matter by his will after Eleven had banished him to that dimension in 1979. Every possessed victim, every flayed human, every coordinated monster attack had traced back to Henry's consciousness, directing operations from his lair in the Upside Down. The prophecies audiences thought they'd been reading were actually echoes, effects mistaken for causes, symptoms misidentified as disease. Season 4 demonstrated that the entire series had been prediction and flashback simultaneously, future and past collapsing into single revelation. Henry's backstory, revealed through Eleven's recovered memories and Victor Creel's testimony, showed that Hawkins' supernatural troubles predated Hawkins' lab by decades. The Creel family's 1959 move into their Hawkins home, the mysterious deaths of Virginia Creel and her daughter Alice, Victor's wrongful conviction for murders his son had committed, all established that the Upside Down's influence had been present long before Eleven opened the first gate. This temporal complexity rewrote the series' causality. Eleven didn't create the problem, but rather interrupted Henry's plans, banishing him before he could continue killing. Her gate opening in 1983 was consequence of her fight with Henry 4 years earlier, the dimensional barrier already weakened by their psychic battle. Season 4 predicted that Season 5 would need to address these temporal paradoxes, would need to explain how Henry's influence in the 1950s could exist if he wasn't banished to the Upside Down until 1979. Victor Creel's imprisonment in Penhurst Mental Hospital, his decades of suffering for crimes he hadn't committed, provided narrative parallel to Season 1's government conspiracy themes, while introducing the mechanism that would save Max's life. Victor's survival of Henry's attacks, achieved through focus on a specific memory triggered by his favourite song, established music as protection against Vecna's curse. This discovery, made by Nancy and Robin during their investigation, predicted the running up that hill scene that would become Season 4's most iconic moment. Music, the series revealed, could anchor consciousness, could prevent Vecna from fully entering victims' minds, could interrupt the curse at crucial moments. This prophetic connection between sound and salvation had been embedded since Season 1's emphasis on music, from the opening credits' synthesizer themes to Will's communication through Joyce's stereo, from the Snowball's pop standards to Season 3's mall soundtrack. The series had been predicting that music would prove essential to survival. Audiences simply hadn't understood its specific mechanism until Victor explained his experience. Max Mayfield's targeting by Vecna fulfilled grim prophecies planted across previous seasons. Her guilt over Billy's death, her depression following his sacrifice, her isolation from friends, her nightmares and trauma, all made her vulnerable to Vecna's curse. The entity selected victims based on their emotional suffering, their unresolved grief and guilt, their psychic wounds that created openings for his invasion. Max's letters, written to friends and family as farewell documents, demonstrated her acceptance of seemingly inevitable death while providing emotional closure that would make her survival more impactful. Her running toward her friends' voices while Running Up That Hill played. Her escape from Vecna's mindscape through Kate Bush's ascending chords and Max's memories of happy moments with Lucas L. and her friends represented triumph of love and connection over trauma and isolation. Her victory proved temporary. Vecna's curse, though interrupted, had marked her permanently. When she died in Lucas's arms in the Creel house attic, her bones broken and eyes destroyed, the show appeared to fulfill its darkest prediction yet. Eleven's desperate psychic intervention, entering Max's consciousness and somehow reviving her despite clinical death, saved her body but left her in coma, consciousness hidden somewhere 11 couldn't reach. This half-death, this liminal state between life and extinction, predicted Season 5's challenge. Max's rescue wouldn't be simple resurrection, but recovery of consciousness from wherever Vecna had trapped it. Her survival came with costs that made victory feel Pyrrhic, demonstrating the series' increasing willingness to allow permanent consequences even as main characters technically survived. Chrissy Cunningham's death in Eddie Munson's trailer, the season's opening murder, established Vecna's methodology while creating the circumstances that would make Eddie a fugitive. Chrissy's vulnerability, her eating disorder driven by her mother's criticism, and her boyfriend Jason's expectations. Her desperation for relief that led her to buy drugs from Eddie, all made her perfect first victim for Vecna's demonstration of power. Her levitation, her bone breaking, her eye destruction, all performed in front of Eddie, who could only watch in horror, created witness, whose testimony would seem too fantastic to believe. Jason Carver's conviction that Eddie had murdered Chrissy through satanic ritual rather than supernatural curse turned Hawkins against the Hellfire Club leader, creating manhunt that would define the season's Hawkins storyline. Eddie's character, introduced as seeming antagonist through his theatrical hostility and drug dealing, revealed itself as another of the show's prophetic redemption arcs. His love of Dungeons and Dragons, his mentorship of younger players through Hellfire Club, his loyalty to his Uncle Wayne, his genuine kindness beneath performative rebellion, all established him as hero before circumstances forced him to prove it. His insistence that he was no hero, that he always ran when things got hard, predicted his final moments when he would choose to stand and fight. The pattern established through Bob and Billy's sacrifices recurred with Eddie. The character introduced in Season 4, developed thoroughly enough to matter emotionally, would die heroically to save others, would fulfill the prophecy of his own courage that he couldn't believe in until circumstances demanded it. His death, playing master of puppets on his guitar to draw demobats away from the Creel house, fulfilling his role as distraction while others attacked Vecna in the Upside Down, represented the series' most musically dramatic sacrifice. His guitar solo, loud and defiant in that dark dimension, drew the creatures away from their master's call. His decision to cut the rope and prevent Dustin from following him back into danger, his choice to face the swarm rather than flee, all fulfilled prophecies embedded in his introduction. The character who ran from confrontation became the one who stood his ground. His death in Dustin's arms, his final words insisting that Dustin needed to tell his uncle that he had died trying to help, completed an arc from coward to hero in 9 episodes. The series had demonstrated again its ability to make audiences love characters quickly enough that their deaths created genuine grief. The California storyline, following the Byers and 11 in their new life away from Hawkins, initially seemed disconnected from the main narrative before revealing itself as essential to understanding the mythology. 11's struggles in school, her bullying by Angela and other students, her powerlessness, both social and supernatural, demonstrated consequences of Season 3's finale. Without her abilities, she was just awkward girl with traumatic past and no social skills to navigate normal teenage life. Her frustration, her rage at Angela during the roller rink incident, her assault with the skate that led to arrest and government intervention, all showed darkness within her that power loss had previously masked through utility. She was capable of violence, capable of cruelty, capable of choices that harmed others even without supernatural enhancement. Her recruitment by Dr. Owens and Dr. Sam, their Nina project designed to help her recover memories and restore powers, brought her to the facility where she would confront her past. The sensory deprivation tank sessions, the systematic re-experiencing of her childhood at Hawkins' lab, the gradual revelation of Henry's presence in her early life, all led toward the memory she had suppressed. The massacre at Hawkins' lab in 1979, the murder of all the numbered children by one after Brenner had removed his power-suppressing chip. The revelation that 11 had been blamed for deaths she hadn't caused reframed her entire history. She hadn't been dangerous child-killing indiscriminately, but rather the only one strong enough to stop Henry's rampage. Her battle with one, her decision to open a temporary gate and banish him into the Upside Down rather than kill him, created the circumstances that would define the series. She had meant to protect others by removing him from their dimension. Instead, she'd given him access to realm where his powers could expand without limit, where he could reshape matter according to his will, where he could create the Mind Flayer and direct its invasions. Her mercy in childhood had enabled all subsequent horrors, a prophecy of how good intentions could generate terrible consequences. This revelation predicted that her final confrontation with Vecna would require different choice, that mercy had proven insufficient, that some threats needed permanent elimination rather than banishment. The Russia storyline, following Hopper's imprisonment and Joyce and Murray's rescue mission, provided geographic separation while fulfilling Season 3's mid-credits scene promise. Hopper's time in the Soviet labor camp, his forced battle against a captured Demogorgon for guards' entertainment, his survival through alliances with other prisoners, including Dmitri and Yuri, all demonstrated that he had endured months of trauma that would require processing. His physical state when Joyce found him, his emaciation and injuries, his PTSD responses, and emotional shutdown showed that rescue didn't mean recovery. The man who returned from Russia would need time to remember how to be the person he had been, to reconnect with the daughter who thought him dead, to resume relationships that imprisonment had interrupted. Joyce's determination to save him, her conviction that he had survived despite all evidence suggesting otherwise, fulfilled patterns established in Season 1 when she had refused to believe Will was dead. Her maternal instinct extended beyond biological children to those she loved. Her recruitment of Murray for the rescue mission, their infiltration of the prison through bribery and deception, their extraction of Hopper during demagogue and chaos, all demonstrated competence and courage that adult characters increasingly needed as supernatural threats escalated. The partnership between Joyce and Murray, platonic and professional, provided adult friendship dynamic that the series had previously underrepresented. The Upside Down's temporal freeze revealed when Nancy entered that dimension and discovered her diary ending in November 1983, provided crucial information that reframed the entire mythology. This dimension wasn't evolving parallel to Hawkins, but rather stuck at the moment of first contact. The day 11 opened the gate, the day Will disappeared, the Upside Down had captured a snapshot of Hawkins and frozen there. This explained why the geography matched perfectly, why locations in both dimensions corresponded, why characters could navigate the dark world using their knowledge of the real one. It also suggested that the Upside Down wasn't separate dimension, but rather Hawkins itself reflected and corrupted, Shadow Realm created through dimensional breach rather than existing independently before contact. This temporal complexity predicted questions Season 5 would need to address. Why had that specific moment frozen? What made November 6, 1983, the point of temporal fixation? Did this relate to Will's specific importance, to his connection as first victim? The discovery implied that Will's disappearance hadn't been random selection, but rather deliberate targeting, that something about him mattered to the Upside Down's nature, or Henry's plans. Will's continued sensitivity, his artistic visions, his emotional connection to the dimension, all suggested that Season 5 would reveal his centrality to the conflict's resolution. Will's painting, created in California and brought to Hawkins for Mike, contained prophecies, both narrative and personal. The artwork depicted the party as fantasy heroes, with Mike positioned as leader holding light against darkness. Will's use of this painting to encourage Mike to express feelings he couldn't speak directly demonstrated his continued love for his best friend while maintaining plausible deniability about that love's nature. His conversation with Mike in the van, his tears while explaining the painting's meaning, his attribution of its message to 11 rather than claiming it as his own expression, showed someone unable to come out directly, but unable to fully hide his truth either. His Season 4 arc predicted that Season 5 would address his sexuality explicitly rather than through continued subtext. The painting's real meaning, his clear romantic feelings for Mike, expressed through supposedly 11's perspective, created situation that couldn't remain ambiguous indefinitely. The series had been predicting Will's queerness since Season 1, through his difference from other boys, his lack of interest in girls, his sensitive, artistic nature, read as femininity by bullies. Season 4 moved from subtext to text, from hints to confirmation, waiting only for Will's explicit statement. His coming out, whether to Mike specifically or to the group generally, became narrative inevitability that Season 5 would need to fulfill. Jonathan's awareness of Will's secret, demonstrated through their conversation in the pizza kitchen, showed that Will had at least one family member who understood and accepted him. Jonathan's gentle encouragement, his assurance that Will could talk to him when ready, his visible love for his brother, despite or because of Will's difference, predicted that the buyers, Family would provide support when Will finally spoke his truth. This acceptance within family contrasted with the homophobia present in 1980s Indiana. The cultural context that made Will's silence understandable, even as it caused him pain. Robin and Vicky's relationship, developing through band practice and tentative conversations, fulfilled Season 3's prediction that Robin's coming out would lead to romance with reciprocally interested girl. Their awkward flirtation, their shared fast-talking tendencies, their connection over film preferences, all suggested compatibility that future seasons could develop. The series demonstrated commitment to LGBTQ+ representation through multiple characters across different stages of self-acceptance. Robin was out and searching for connection. Will remained closeted but increasingly unable to hide. The show predicted that Season 5 would continue exploring queer identity in period-appropriate context, acknowledging both the challenges of 1980s homophobia and the possibility of finding community and acceptance. The four gates opening at the locations of Vecna's four murders, converging in massive X pattern across Hawkins, fulfilled prophecies about escalation and invasion. Each victim's death had created small gate, dimensional breach, allowing upside-down matter to seep into Hawkins. The four gates together, spreading from their individual locations to meet at the town's centre, created rift that couldn't be contained or hidden. The upside down began bleeding into Hawkins visibly, particles falling like snow, vines spreading across buildings, the barrier between dimensions degrading rapidly. This predicted Season 5's setting. The final season wouldn't alternate between Hawkins and Upside Down, but rather deal with their merger, with town transformed into hybrid space, where both dimensions coexisted, where boundaries between real and reflected had broken down completely. The season's conclusion, with Hawkins evacuating, with military presence increasing, with the town itself transforming into disaster zone, demonstrated that secrets couldn't be maintained indefinitely. The cover story about earthquakes satisfied national media, but not residents who had experienced supernatural horror directly. The community divided between those who left, seeking safety elsewhere, and those who stayed, either because they had nowhere else to go or because they felt responsible for fighting the threat they now recognized. This division predicted Season 5's reduced setting, fewer characters, tighter focus on those who remained to face final battle. Dustin's grief over Eddie, his task of informing Wayne Munson that Eddie had died a hero despite being wanted by police as murderer, provided emotional weight that extended beyond plot utility. His struggle to explain what happened, his inability to prove Eddie's innocence through conventional evidence, his carrying of guilt for surviving when Eddie hadn't, all demonstrated that this death affected characters who survived it. Eddie wouldn't be forgotten, wouldn't be reduced to plot device, but rather would haunt those who knew him through their final confrontation. The series predicted that Season 5 would carry forward the accumulated losses, that victory if achieved would come at costs that made celebration bittersweet. Lucas's trauma from watching Max die in his arms, from feeling helpless as her bones broke and eyes went dark, from knowing he couldn't save her despite his proximity, paralleled Dustin's survivor guilt while adding dimension of romantic loss. His vigil at Max's bedside after her revival, his daily visits reading to her unconscious form, his refusal to give up hope for her recovery, all predicted that their relationship would be central to Season 5's emotional arc. Her return to consciousness, when or if it occurred, would mean more because of his devotion during her absence. Steve's continued search for romantic connection, his brief rekindling of interest in Nancy before recognizing that she had moved on, his acceptance that his future might not include romantic partnership, demonstrated character growth that subverted conventional narrative expectations. The former popular kid with succession of girlfriends had become the babysitter who found purpose in protecting others, rather than pursuing romance. His possible future, the 6 Nuggets family dream he described to Nancy, remained aspirational rather than immediate, prediction rather than promise. The series suggested that finding purpose mattered more than finding romance, that Steve's value wasn't dependent on girlfriend acquisition, that masculine identity could center caregiving rather than conquest. Nancy's evolution continued through her investigation of Victor Creel, her infiltration of Penhurst Hospital, her descent into Vecna's mindscape, where she witnessed his origin and intentions, her visions of nuclear family future with Steve, deliberately deployed by Vecna to torment her with conventional life she didn't want, revealed that she sought more than suburban domesticity. Her journalism career aspirations, her desire to expose truth and pursue justice, predicted that Season 5 would show her continuing this path, rather than settling into expected feminine roles. The show had been predicting Nancy's trajectory since Season 1. She was always going to be the warrior investigator, someone who fought monsters, both supernatural and systemic. Season 4's structure itself, the split volumes and extended episode lengths, predicted that Season 5 would similarly reject conventional format in favour of serving narrative needs. The Duffer Brothers had demonstrated willingness to adjust structure across all seasons, never settling into comfortable pattern, but rather adapting each season's shape to its specific story requirements. This predicted that the final season would determine its own length and structure, based on what the conclusion needed, whether that meant additional episodes or feature-length finale. The volume split, creating month-long gap between episodes 7 and 8, allowed for audience processing and speculation, while building anticipation for the massive Volume 2 episodes. This predicted that Season 5 might employ similar strategies, might release in stages rather than all at once, might use format itself as tool for managing audience experience. The series had trained viewers to trust its structural choices, to understand that form served function, that departures from expectation came with purpose. The prophecies embedded throughout Season 4 pointed clearly toward apocalyptic conclusion. Vecna's promise that he would continue opening gates until Hawkins was consumed, until the Upside Down spread across the world, established stakes that required permanent resolution. The revelation that he had been responsible for all previous threats reframed every past victory as temporary, every previous gate closing as insufficient. Season 5 would need to address the source, would need to defeat Henry rather than simply interrupt his current plan, would need to seal dimensional barriers permanently or acknowledge that coexistence with the Upside Down had become inevitable reality. The patterns established across 4 seasons suggested specific shapes for the conclusion still being filmed. Victory would require sacrifice. Multiple characters would die. Power would come at cost. Truth would hurt before it healed. Love would prove stronger than trauma, but wouldn't erase trauma's scars. The series had been teaching audiences to read its prophetic language, to understand its narrative values, to anticipate its moves, even as specific plot points remained mysteries. Season 4 demonstrated that Stranger Things had always known its destination, that the journey from Will's disappearance to Vecna's revelation followed deliberately constructed path, that every breadcrumb had led somewhere meaningful. The show predicted its own mythology with increasing precision across its run, trusting audiences to maintain faith through increasingly complex narrative architecture, rewarding attention with revelations that recontextualized everything that came before, while pointing toward everything still to come. The final season of Stranger Things, while unaired at the time of this analysis, reveals itself through the patterns established across 4 seasons of careful prediction. The show has taught audiences to read its prophetic language, to recognize recurring structures, to understand that nothing is arbitrary. By examining these established patterns, the likely shape of Season 5's conclusion emerges with scholarly clarity. The Duffer Brothers have constructed their mythology with sufficient consistency that the destination, while not detailed in specifics, appears outlined in broad strokes through the accumulated weight of foreshadowing. The time jump between Season 4 and Season 5 follows established precedent. Every season has advanced the timeline, allowing characters to age naturally and circumstances to evolve between major events. The gap between seasons typically ranges from several months to a year, giving characters time to process trauma, for relationships to develop or deteriorate away from audience observation, for Hawkins to transform in response to previous crises. Season 5 likely begins months after the convergence of gates, showing Hawkins changed fundamentally by the Upside Down's invasion, the town operating as hybrid space where dimensional boundaries have weakened to transparency. Max's fate represents one of Season 5's most crucial predictions. Her coma state at Season 4's conclusion cannot persist through the final season without resolution. The show has established that consciousness can exist separately from body, that Vecna can trap minds while leaving physical forms in suspended animation. Eleven's inability to locate Max's consciousness in the void suggests that Max exists somewhere Eleven cannot yet reach, hidden within Vecna's domain or scattered across the Upside Down itself. Her recovery will require more than medical intervention. The pattern suggests a psychic rescue mission, 11 and possibly Will entering Vecna's mindscape to retrieve Max's consciousness and return it to her healing body. This rescue will likely occur during the final confrontation, making personal stakes inseparable from apocalyptic ones. Will Byers' centrality to Season 5 has been predicted since his Season 1 disappearance. He was the first taken, the first possessed, the first to maintain lasting connection to the Upside Down. His artistic visions, his neck-tingling sensitivity, his ability to sense Vecna's presence, all point toward his essential role in the final battle. The revelation that the Upside Down froze at the moment of his disappearance suggests that he carries significance beyond being first victim. His connection to Mike, his unspoken love, his struggle with identity, all predict that his personal journey toward self-acceptance will parallel his role in defeating Vecna. The pattern established across 4 seasons indicates that Will must confront both internal and external demons, that his coming out and his heroism will be linked rather than separate narratives. The structure of sacrifice that has defined the series predicts that multiple main characters will die in Season 5's conclusion. Bob, Billy, Eddie, and arguably Max have established the pattern. The final season must raise stakes beyond previous losses. The core group, protected through 4 seasons despite numerous near-deaths, cannot all survive without undermining the gravity of apocalyptic threat. Steve Harrington's arc, his evolution from selfish teenager to selfless protector, his repeatedly stated willingness to die for the kids he babysits, points toward heroic sacrifice. His death would devastate audiences while fulfilling character trajectory established. Across multiple seasons, his lack of supernatural abilities, his role as purely human defender against interdimensional horror, makes him simultaneously vulnerable and symbolically powerful. Hopper's survival of apparent death in Season 3 complicates predictions about his Season 5 fate. The show cannot deploy the same fake-out twice without diminishing emotional impact. His genuine death becomes possibility precisely because audiences now expect his survival. However, his reunion with 11, his need to fulfill the father role that imprisonment interrupted, suggests that he will survive to series' end. The pattern indicates that he will face moment requiring sacrifice, will prepare to die protecting his daughter, but will somehow survive to provide the family stability that 11 has never consistently possessed. Joyce Byers' role as emotional anchor and fierce protector predicts that she will survive, that her family will remain intact despite losses around them. The Byers have suffered disproportionately across 4 seasons. Will's possession, Bob's death, Jonathan's struggles, their displacement from Hawkins, all point toward eventual reward for perseverance. Joyce's relationship with Hopper, interrupted by his apparent death and imprisonment, requires resolution that satisfies their multi-season build-up. Their reunion in Season 4 predicted that Season 5 would provide them opportunity for the relationship that circumstances have repeatedly prevented. Mike and Eleven's relationship must address the communication failures that have plagued them since Season 3. Mike's inability to say, "I love you," except under extreme duress. Eleven's insecurity about being wanted for herself rather than her powers. The fundamental imbalance in their dynamic created by her supernatural abilities and traumatic background all require confrontation. The pattern suggests a separation that forces both characters toward independence before they can reunite as equals. Their love, genuine but immature, must evolve or end. The series has predicted through their struggles that young romance requires growth, that first love doesn't guarantee final love, that choosing each other must be active decision rather than default option. Vecna's defeat requires more than simple destruction. The revelation that he has orchestrated all previous threats, that the Mind Flayer is his creation rather than separate entity, means that his elimination would theoretically end the Upside Down's organized invasion. However, the dimensional barrier's degradation, the gates spreading across Hawkins, the fundamental weakening of reality's fabric, cannot be reversed simply by killing one villain. The pattern suggests a sacrifice play, someone choosing to seal themselves in the Upside Down to close gates permanently, ensuring that even Vecna's death cannot allow future breaches. Eleven's power arc predicts that she will access abilities beyond anything previously demonstrated. Her Season 4 recovery of memories and powers represents intermediate step rather than final form. The pattern established through her development suggests that confronting Vecna will require her to achieve her full potential, possibly at cost of those very abilities. The show has been building toward Eleven choosing normal life over supernatural power, choosing to be Jane Hopper rather than Eleven, choosing family and friendship over being weapon. Her final act may be using her powers to seal the Upside Down, while simultaneously severing her own connection to that dimension, choosing humanity over ability. The gate closure mechanic must differ from previous season solutions. Burning tunnels, destroying Russian machines, and physically disrupting portals have provided temporary victories, but not permanent resolution. Season 5 requires permanent solution, one that addresses dimensional barriers' fundamental weakness rather than treating symptoms. The pattern suggests that closing gates from within the Upside Down, itself sealing the dimension from the inside, represents the only viable approach. This predicts that characters will need to enter Vecna's domain for final confrontation, that victory requires going to the source rather than defending Hawkins' borders. The D&D campaign metaphor that has run throughout the series predicts its own conclusion. The party, initially playing fantasy games in Mike's basement, has been living those scenarios across 4 seasons. The final campaign, the ultimate battle against the Demogorgon that became Mind Flayer that became Vecna, must conclude with party victory, but not without losses. The game has always predicted reality, suggesting that Season 5 will include actual D&D scenes that parallel or foreshadow the real battle, maintaining the series' foundational metaphor through its conclusion. Hawkins' fate represents significant question mark. The town cannot return to normal after Season 4's public devastation. The military presence, the evacuations, the visible, dimensional breach all make continued secrecy impossible. The series must decide whether Hawkins survives as location or whether the town itself becomes permanent casualty. The pattern suggests containment, Hawkins quarantined as dimensional dead zone, its remaining population relocated, the town abandoned to serve as buffer between dimensions. This dark conclusion would fulfill the escalation pattern while providing bittersweet victory. The world is saved, but Hawkins is lost. The epilogue structure, established through previous seasons' time jumps, predicts that Season 5 will conclude with significant temporal distance from final battle. Whether months or years later, the ending will show surviving characters adapting to post-Vecna existence. The pattern suggests bittersweet tone, acknowledging losses while celebrating survival, showing characters beginning healing processes while carrying permanent scars. The series has been predicting this tonal conclusion since Season 1. Horror and hope coexist. Trauma and growth develop simultaneously. Victory costs more than anyone wanted to pay, but less than total destruction. These predictions, drawn from 4 seasons of careful narrative architecture, suggest a conclusion that will honor both the series' darkness and its fundamental optimism about friendship's power. The patterns indicate sacrifice, transformation, and ultimately closure that returns to the series' beginnings, while demonstrating how far characters have come. Season 5 must balance resolving established prophecies while providing emotional satisfaction, answering mysteries while leaving room for interpretation, concluding definitively while honoring the journey. The show has predicted its own ending through every careful choice made since Will Byers first vanished into the woods. Audiences who have learned to read its prophetic language can glimpse the destination even as specific roads remain mysterious. Beyond seasonal chronology, Stranger Things has embedded predictions through visual language as sophisticated as its dialogue. The show's cinematography, color theory, and symbolic imagery have carried prophecies that reward careful observation. These visual predictions operate on levels both conscious and subliminal, guiding audiences toward future revelations through symbolic consistency that accumulates meaning across years of storytelling. From its opening frames, Stranger Things has spoken in visual languages that predict future developments as clearly as any dialogue. The show's cinematography, production design, and color theory create prophetic systems that operate beneath conscious awareness, guiding audiences toward future revelations through symbolic consistency. Tim Ives and Lachlan Milne, the series' primary cinematographers, constructed visual vocabulary in Season 1 that would accumulate meaning across subsequent seasons, creating patterns that trained viewers to read images as prophecies even before plot confirmed their significance. The red and blue lighting scheme, established throughout the pilot episode, created color language that would define the series' visual approach to dimensional proximity. Red light, initially associated with danger and supernatural presence, appeared during the opening Hawkins lab sequence when the scientist encountered the Demogorgon. Blue light, suggesting normalcy and safety, illuminated domestic spaces and daylight scenes. The interplay between these colors predicted the Upside Down's relationship to Hawkins. When both colors appeared simultaneously, particularly in flickering alternation, the show signaled that boundaries between dimensions were thinning, that the Upside Down was pressing close to reality. This chromatic prophecy would recur in every season, becoming more pronounced as gates multiplied and dimensional barriers weakened. The Christmas lights in the Byers' living room, strung across walls and ceiling in Joyce's desperate alphabet, created visual metaphor that extended far beyond Season 1's immediate narrative. The coloured bulbs, glowing and flickering with supernatural significance, established light as communication medium. This imagery predicted not just future methods of interdimensional contact, but the series' broader thematic interest in finding connection across impossible distances. The lights photographed beautifully, creating visual texture that transformed the Byers' shabby home into something magical and strange. Their prophetic quality became clear in Season 4, when characters again used light-based communication to coordinate between dimensions, fulfilling promises embedded in Joyce's improvised alphabet years earlier. Mirrors and reflective surfaces appeared with deliberate frequency across all seasons, predicting the show's eventual revelation about the Upside Down as dark reflection of Hawkins. Nancy's examination of herself in mirrors during Season 1, particularly before and after her relationship with Steve, developed complications, suggested dual identities, the person she appeared to be versus who she was becoming. The Upside Down's waters, still and dark, reflected characters when they looked down, creating unsettling doubling effect. These mirror images predicted Season 4's discovery that the Upside Down was Hawkins reflected and corrupted, that the two dimensions existed in relationship of original to shadow, reality to nightmare echo. The series deployed mirrors during moments of character crisis and self-confrontation with remarkable consistency. Eleven's examination of her shaved head in Season 1, her shock at her own appearance, predicted her ongoing identity struggles. Steve's constant checking of his hair in various reflective surfaces, initially played for comedy, predicted his eventual need to define himself beyond physical appearance. Max's avoidance of her own reflection in Season 4, her covering of mirrors in her trailer home, predicted Vecna's attack through her psyche, his exploitation of her self-hatred and guilt. The mirror became tool for both prophecy and psychology, external image reflecting internal state, while suggesting duplicity and hidden truths. Clock imagery accumulated across 4 seasons before Season 4 made its significance explicit through Vecna's use of time as weapon. Clocks appeared in background of scenes with such frequency that their omnipresence became normalized, noticed only subconsciously. The Wheeler's kitchen clock, visible in numerous family scenes. The school hallway clocks, marking periods and dismissals. The grandfather clock in the Creel house, standing sentinel in the abandoned home's foyer. These timepieces, often shown stopped or running backward in upside-down scenes, predicted Vecna's curse mechanics. His victims saw the grandfather clock in their visions, heard its chimes counting down to their deaths. The clock had been warning audiences since Season 1 that time itself would become a weapon, that temporal manipulation would prove central to the mythology. The series' use of clocks demonstrated sophisticated visual storytelling. Rather than introducing the grandfather clock symbol in Season 4 when it became plot relevant, the show had been establishing clock imagery as ominous throughout its run. Viewers recognized the grandfather clock's significance immediately, because they had been conditioned to associate timepieces with dread through seasons of subliminal reinforcement. This prophetic technique, operating through accumulated exposure rather than explicit foreshadowing, rewarded attentive viewers while remaining accessible to casual audiences who absorbed the symbolism unconsciously. Water served as recurring visual motif, predicting transformation and danger throughout the series. Characters emerged from water changed. 11 crawled from the quarry in Season 1, reborn after her apparent disintegration. Barb died in the Harrington's pool, pulled under by the Demogorgon, her blood spreading across blue chlorinated water in crimson clouds. The bathtub sensory deprivation tanks that allowed 11 to access the void showed her submerged, floating in darkness, accessing psychic abilities through water immersion. The Season 2 tunnels dripped with moisture, organic and wet, suggesting that the Upside Down itself possessed aquatic qualities. Season 4's emphasis on water reached its peak through Victor Creel's bathtub scene at Penhurst and 11's immersion in the Nina Project's sensory deprivation chamber. Water consistently predicted psychological journeys, descents into memory or consciousness that would transform those who submerged. The series photographed water beautifully, using it to create visual texture and symbolic depth. the still waters of the Upside Down, the rippling surfaces in Eleven's Void, the rain that accompanied moments of crisis, all contributed to Water's prophetic language. It promised change, threatened drowning, enabled access to hidden realms of consciousness and dimension. The gates themselves evolved visually across seasons in ways that predicted their eventual convergence. The original gate in Hawkins' lab appeared organic, pulsing like living tissue, suggesting wound or portal, torn through flesh rather than mechanical doorway. Its visual design established that dimensional breaches possessed biological qualities, that they were injuries to reality rather than constructed passages. The tunnel system in Season 2 extended this aesthetic, creating vein-like passages that spread beneath Hawkins like infection. The Russian gate in Season 3, forced open through technological means, displayed similar organic qualities despite mechanical origin, suggesting that all gates partook of the Upside Down's biological horror regardless of how they were created. Season 4's four gates, opening at Vecna's murder locations, appeared as vertical tiers in reality, glowing with red light and pulsing with malevolent energy. There, spread across Hawkins, reaching toward each other to form the massive X pattern that converged on the town centre, fulfilled visual prophecies embedded in previous gates' designs. The imagery had been predicting that breaches would multiply, that dimensional barriers would degrade progressively, that individual gates would eventually merge into unified rift. The visual consistency across gate designs, maintaining organic aesthetic even as scale increased, demonstrated careful planning of symbolic language across multiple seasons and production teams. Character positioning within frames carried its own predictive weight. The series frequently isolated Eleven visually, placing her apart from groups even when physically present in the same space. This compositional choice predicted her ongoing isolation, her difficulty integrating fully into friend groups and family structures. When she stood with others, she often appeared slightly separated, a step back or to the side, suggesting that her supernatural abilities and traumatic background created distance that proximity couldn't bridge. Season 4's emphasis on her feeling different from her peers, her struggles in California, fulfilled prophecies embedded in 4 seasons of careful framing choices. The show positioned Will similarly, particularly in Seasons 2 through 4, placing him at edges of group shots or having him linger in background while others interacted in foreground. This visual isolation predicted his continued separation from his friends' romantic interests, his feeling of being left behind as others matured into different priorities. The camera's treatment of Will suggested loneliness before dialogue made it explicit, using composition to prophesy his emotional state seasons in advance. Mike and Eleven's physical positioning when together demonstrated their relationship's intensity and problems simultaneously. The camera often framed them in tight two-shots, excluding others, suggesting their obsessive focus on each other. However, their frequent lack of eye contact within these intimate frames, their tendency to look past each other rather than directly connecting, predicted communication failures that would plague their relationship. The visual language suggested disconnection within proximity, misunderstanding within intimacy, prophecy of conflicts that later seasons would develop through dialogue and plot. The color grading progression across seasons predicted tonal shifts and narrative developments. Season 1's relatively naturalistic palette, emphasizing earth tones and realistic lighting, established baseline reality against which supernatural elements would appear shocking. Season 2's warmer autumn colors, particularly during Halloween sequences, created false sense of comfort that Will's possession would shatter. Season 3's neon-saturated aesthetic, all bright pinks and electric blues in mall sequences, disguised horror beneath commercial cheerfulness, predicting the season's thematic interest in capitalism as mask for invasion. Season 4's return to darker, more desaturated tones for Hawkins sequences, while maintaining brightness for California scenes created visual contrast that predicted narrative convergence. The two locations' different atmospheres, suggesting they would need to merge for resolution. The Upside Down's consistent visual presentation, established in Season 1 and maintained with a remarkable fidelity across all subsequent appearances, created aesthetic continuity that allowed for effective visual prophecy. The floating particles, described in production materials as resembling spores or snow, suggested biological corruption spreading through air. The blue-tinted darkness, never complete blackness but rather murky visibility, allowed cinematographers to create recognizable geography while maintaining alien atmosphere. The organic vines and tendrils covering all surfaces in that dimension, pulsing with unpleasant vitality, established the Upside Down as living realm rather than dead wasteland. This visual consistency paid off in Season 4's revelation that the Upside Down had frozen at November 6, 1983. Audiences immediately recognized the dimension's appearance, understood that it matched previous depictions, and therefore trusted the revelation about temporal fixation. Had the Upside Down's appearance varied significantly between seasons, this crucial plot point would have required extensive explanation and might have seemed like retcon rather than planned revelation. The visual prophecy worked because production design had maintained strict continuity across multiple years of filming and different directing teams. Costume design contributed to visual prophecy through careful character development across seasons. Eleven's progression from hospital gown to Mike's too large clothes, to her Season 2 punk look with Carly, to her Season 3 mall fashion, to her Season 4 California style, charted her identity journey visually. Each costume phase predicted her psychological state and social position. The hospital gown suggested institutional captivity and dehumanization. Mike's borrowed clothes predicted her adoption into his family and friend group. The punk aesthetic predicted her rebellion and attempt to define herself through anger. The mall clothes predicted her embrace of conventional femininity and teenage normalcy. The California looks predicted her displacement and continued struggle to fit in. Steve's hair, maintaining its distinctive volume across all seasons despite changes in his circumstances and relationships, served as visual constant that grounded his character even as his personality transformed dramatically. The attention paid to maintaining this specific aesthetic detail predicted that Steve's core identity, his essential Steveness, would persist despite growth and development. His hair became prophecy of continuity within change, promise that transformation didn't require abandoning recognizable self. Max's use of color in clothing predicted her emotional states before dialogue confirmed them. Her bright California colors in Season 2, her vibrant reds and blues, suggested personality and energy. Her Season 3 wardrobe continued this pattern, showing her integrated and comfortable. Her Season 4 clothing, dominated by muted tones and darker shades, predicted her depression before any character acknowledged it explicitly. The visual dimming of her characteristic brightness served as warning that trauma had fundamentally altered her, that Billy's death had drained color from her world, literally and figuratively. The opening credits sequence evolved across seasons in ways that predicted plot developments. Season 1's credits introduced the town name letter by letter, suggesting discovery and revelation. Season 2 added images of the Mind Flayer's shadow form, predicting its emergence as primary threat. Season 3's credits incorporated more vibrant colors and faster pacing, predicting the season's summer energy and commercial satire. Season 4's credits returned to darker tones, while adding new imagery, including Russian elements and California locations, predicting the season's geographic expansion and tonal darkness. The credits served as visual overture, establishing each season's aesthetic and thematic concerns before plot began. Lighting changes predicted character alignment, shifts, and moral complexity with subtle precision. Characters filmed in harsh overhead light, creating deep shadows under eyes and cheekbones, appeared more threatening or morally compromised. Billy's introduction featured this lighting extensively, predicting his role as antagonist while suggesting depth beneath surface cruelty. Dr. Brenner's scenes consistently employed this technique, maintaining his sinister appearance even during moments of apparent kindness or paternal concern. The lighting predicted that his motives would remain suspect regardless of his actions, that surface behavior couldn't be trusted. Conversely, soft, natural lighting or warm, practical light sources surrounded characters the show wanted audiences to trust. Bob Newby appeared almost exclusively in gentle lighting that emphasized his kind face and genuine smile, predicting that he would prove as decent as he seemed. Joyce received similar treatment, her scenes often lit by lamps or windows that created warmth and safety. The visual language promised that these characters could be trusted emotionally, even when plot created uncertainty about their immediate decisions. Environmental details in production design predicted cultural and historical context while creating visual richness that rewarded close attention. The buyer's home, cluttered and worn, suggested economic struggle that dialogue didn't need to explicitly state. The Wheeler's house, clean and organized with its pastel color scheme, predicted suburban conformity and emotional repression that would characterize Nancy's family dynamics. The trailer park where Max lived, photographed to emphasize its difference from Hawkins' suburban neighborhoods, predicted class tensions and economic disparities that would affect character relationships and social dynamics. The Hawkins lab facility, filmed to emphasize institutional sterility and bureaucratic coldness, predicted that governmental and scientific authority would prove unreliable and often malevolent. The long corridors, harsh fluorescent lighting, and clinical equipment all created atmosphere of dehumanization. This visual language established that institutions stripped humanity from those within them, whether scientists conducting experiments or children subjected to those experiments. The facility's appearance predicted that authority structures would consistently fail to protect citizens, would prioritize knowledge or control over human welfare, would generate problems rather than solving them. The show's cinematographers employed camera angles and movement that predicted power dynamics and character vulnerability. Low angles looking up at characters suggested strength, authority, or threat. High angles looking down suggested weakness, vulnerability, or observation. The series used these techniques consistently to predict character positions in power hierarchies. Brenner appeared frequently in low angles, emphasizing his control over Eleven and other children. Eleven in Season 1 appeared often in high angles, suggesting her powerlessness despite supernatural abilities. As she gained confidence and autonomy across seasons, the camera position gradually shifted, treating her more neutrally or occasionally employing low angles during displays of power. Handheld camera work predicted chaos, danger, or psychological distress. The series employed smooth, steady shots during moments of relative safety and control, then shifted to handheld shakiness during attacks, chases, or emotional breakdowns. This technique provided visual prophecy of coming danger. When previously stable shots began incorporating slight movement or shakiness, audiences subconsciously understood that safety was compromising, that threat was approaching, that something was wrong, even before explicit danger materialized. Visual prophecy operates through accumulation and pattern recognition. A clock appearing in Season 1 gains meaning only when Season 4's Vecna makes time central to his curse, but the accumulated clock imagery across 4 seasons ensures that the grandfather clock in vision sequences carries weight that new symbol couldn't achieve. The consistent use of red lighting near gates trains audiences to read danger before plot confirms it, creating subliminal anticipation that enhances conscious narrative experience. These visual predictions demonstrate that Stranger Things operates as a total artistic system, where every element from lighting to wallpaper pattern contributes to prophetic architecture. The show predicts through imagery as meticulously as through dialogue, creating layered experience that rewards attention to visual detail while remaining accessible to viewers who absorb symbolism unconsciously. The Duffer Brothers and their cinematographers, production designers, and colorists have constructed visual language that prophesies futures, confirms presents, and recontextualizes past simultaneously. Color, composition, costume, and camera work combine into a comprehensive system that tells stories beyond words, predicting plot developments while establishing atmospheric consistency that defines the series' aesthetic identity. The visual prophecies prove that television as medium can operate on multiple levels simultaneously, speaking to conscious attention and subconscious pattern recognition in equal measure. While visual language speaks to subconscious understanding, dialogue operates on explicit levels, characters literally predicting their own futures through seemingly casual conversations. The show's spoken prophecies range from obvious foreshadowing to subtle verbal breadcrumbs that gain significance only in retrospect, creating a dialogue system where nearly every conversation contains seeds of future truth. Words carry weight in Hawkins, Indiana. From the series' first line, Mike Wheeler's narration of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign describing something hungry for blood, a shadow that grows in the deep. Stranger Things has used spoken language to predict its own trajectory. These verbal prophecies range from D&D narrations that literally foreshadow real threats to throwaway lines that later prove crucial, creating a dialogue system where nearly every conversation contains seeds of future truth. The Duffer Brothers write dialogue that operates on multiple levels simultaneously, serving immediate character and plot needs while embedding predictions that require seasons to fulfill. Mike's role as Dungeon Master established him as the series' internal prophet, someone whose fantasy scenarios consistently predicted actual events. His campaign descriptions in Season 1 introduced the Demogorgon by name before the creature appeared, trained audiences to hear his game narrations as foreshadowing rather than mere flavour. His Season 3 campaign, describing a mind flayer with tentacles spreading its influence through enslaved minions, directly predicted the plot that would unfold across that season. The mind flayer he described for his friends became the mind flayer they would fight, the game predicting reality with such precision that it ceased to be coincidence and became prophecy. Mike's continued role as Dungeon Master in later seasons suggested that his campaigns would continue this pattern, that Season 5's adventures might include D&D sequences that parallel or preview the final battle against Vecna. The phrase "friends don't lie" entered the series through Eleven's limited vocabulary in Season 1, Mike's words repeated back to him as moral absolute. This simple statement, initially touching in its directness, accumulated ironic weight across 4 seasons as characters repeatedly lied to friends, usually with good intentions. Mike lied to Eleven about Hopper's threats in Season 3. Eleven lied about her struggles in California. Will lied about the painting's meaning, attributing his own feelings to Eleven. The phrase predicted that truth and deception would become central theme, that the gap between what characters said and what they meant would drive conflicts and misunderstandings. Each lie told by friends created tension between the stated ideal and actual behaviour, prophecy fulfilled through contradiction rather than confirmation. Bob Newby's encouragement to Will in Season 2, his advice to stand up to fears rather than running from them, to face nightmares and tell them to go away, represented tragic misunderstanding that predicted Bob's heroism and Will's continued trauma. Bob's own childhood fears, which he claimed to have conquered through confrontation, seemed mild compared to actual supernatural horror. His advice, well-intentioned and appropriate for ordinary childhood anxieties, proved dangerously inadequate when applied to Mind Flayer possession. Will's attempt to follow Bob's guidance, to confront his fears, resulted in his complete possession rather than liberation from nightmares. Yet Bob's philosophy predicted his own final moments when he would stand against actual monsters rather than running, when he would face literal rather than metaphorical demons. His death fulfilled the courage his words had advocated, demonstrating that sometimes the advice we give others becomes prophecy of our own fate. The nickname Bob gave Will, calling him Zombie Boy in reference to Bully's taunts, while trying to reclaim the term positively, predicted that Will would never fully escape his association with death and the upside down. The moniker, meant kindly, acknowledged that Will's experience had marked him permanently. He had been to the other side and returned, had died symbolically and been resurrected, had become associated with the undead in ways that went beyond mere bullying. This recognition predicted Will's continued role as someone who existed partially in both worlds, who carried death's touch while remaining alive, who would be forever associated with the upside down, regardless of how much time passed or how much he tried to integrate into normal life. Hopper's letter to 11, written before the Season 3 finale and read by Joyce after his apparent death, contained dialogue that predicted their relationship's evolution through separation and reunion. His acknowledgement that change was painful but necessary, that growing up meant embracing difference rather than resisting it, applied to 11's development while foreshadowing his own transformation through imprisonment. His line about how feelings can make you confused can seem like a fire, demonstrated vulnerability that the living Hopper had rarely shown. 11 directly. The letter preserved his pre-trauma self, his capacity for tenderness, before Russian captivity hardened him, creating prophecy of the emotional work their reunion would require. His closing sentiment, the simple statement that 3 inches remained the appropriate separation for bedroom doors, but that he loved her no matter what, combined parental authority with unconditional acceptance. This balance predicted the healthy relationship they would need to develop, moving beyond Hopper's overprotective control and 11's rebellious isolation toward mutual respect. The letter's existence meant that even after believing him dead for months, 11 carried his words, his love, his guidance. When he returned, she would measure the traumatized man against the father who had written those words, would need to reconcile the change imprisonment had wrought while recognizing continuity beneath damage. Billy Hargrove's final words, "I'm sorry," spoken to Max as he used his body to shield her and 11 from the Mind Flayer's attack, fulfilled prophecies embedded in his earlier dialogue. His Season 2 apologies to his father, terrified and desperate, had established that "I'm sorry" was phrase associated with his abuse, words extracted through fear rather than genuine remorse. His Season 3 apology to Max, freely given in his final moments, recontextualized the phrase. This time he apologized for real harm he had caused her, acknowledged his cruelty, expressed genuine regret rather than strategic appeasement. The phrase that had predicted his victimhood earlier now predicted redemption, the same words carrying opposite meanings in different contexts. His dialogue throughout Season 3's possession, his struggles to communicate warnings through the Mind Flayer's control, predicted that consciousness persisted even under supernatural domination. His fragmentary phrases, his moments of breaking through when Max's voice reached him, established that the person remained even when the body was controlled by external force. This pattern predicted Max's Season 4 coma, her consciousness trapped somewhere while her body remained empty. Billy's struggle against possession became prophecy for Max's struggle against Vecna, the victim predicting the survivor, the stepbrother's experience foreshadowing the stepsister's trauma. Murray Bauman's declaration in Season 2 that Nancy, Jonathan and Steve formed a love triangle, that someone would end up hurt, predicted the actual resolution that would occur when Nancy chose Jonathan. His observation, meant as teasing commentary, demonstrated his consistent role as someone who stated truths others avoided acknowledging. His Season 3 conversation with Alexei about cherry flavour versus strawberry, playful and seemingly irrelevant, predicted that small joys mattered amid apocalyptic stakes, that finding delight in slushy flavours was its own form of resistance against horror. Alexei's death shortly after this conversation, his murder while holding the Woody Woodpecker he had won, made Murray's gentle introduction of American culture seem even more precious and tragic. Murray's dialogue consistently operated as prophecy disguised as observation. His truth-telling while drunk in Season 2, forcing Nancy and Jonathan to acknowledge mutual attraction, predicted his Season 3 and 4 roles as catalyst for honest communication. His translations in Season 3, his ability to speak Russian and facilitate understanding between cultures and enemies, predicted that Season 5 would continue requiring his linguistic and interpersonal skills. His conspiracy theories, presented initially as paranoid rambling, consistently proved accurate, establishing that Murray's seemingly wild speculations were actually careful deductions that others dismissed because they sounded implausible. His dialogue predicted that believing the unbelievable would be necessary for survival. Eddie Munson's repeated insistence in Season 4 that he was no hero, that he always ran when things got scary, predicted with painful irony his final sacrifice. His monologue in The Upside Down about how he fled while Chrissy died, how he left her body and ran, established his self-perception as coward. This dialogue made his decision to cut the rope and face the Demobats even more powerful. He was predicting his own heroism through denial, establishing the character trait he would need to overcome. His final words to Dustin, his insistence that he needed to do something heroic for once in his life, fulfilled the prophecy his earlier dialogue had established. He had been calling himself a coward to create contrast for eventual courage, had been predicting transformation he couldn't yet believe himself capable of achieving. His dialogue about Dungeons and Dragons throughout the season, his passionate defense of the game against accusations of satanic influence, predicted that fantasy and reality would continue bleeding into each other. His conviction that D&D taught important lessons about courage, friendship, and facing evil proved literally true as the Hellfire Club's campaigns paralleled actual battles against supernatural threats. His role as Dungeon Master positioned him as prophet within the narrative, his game descriptions predicting real encounters just as Mike's had in earlier seasons. Max's letters, written to friends and family in Season 4 as she prepared for death, contained dialogue that predicted both her fate and her values. Her letter to Lucas acknowledged that she had pushed him away, that her grief over Billy had made her unable to accept love and support. This admission predicted that their relationship would need his devotion during her coma to maintain connection she couldn't consciously reciprocate. Her letter to Lucas became prophecy of his vigil, his daily readings to her unconscious form, his refusal to abandon her despite her inability to respond. Her dialogue in earlier seasons, her sarcastic dismissals and defensive hostility, predicted that she used humour and anger to avoid vulnerability. Her Season 2 line about not being interested in friends, her Season 3 declarations of independence from Lucas, all established patterns of self-protection through isolation. Season 4's letters represented reversal of this pattern, written acknowledgement that she did need people, that isolation was choice rather than preference. The dialogue predicted that connection would ultimately matter more than self-protection, that Max would need to accept help in order to survive. Will Byers' Season 3 outburst, his declaration that he wasn't going to fall in love, predicted with painful irony exactly what was happening to him. The line delivered in frustration at Mike and Lucas's romantic obsessions seemed to position Will as child clinging to childhood pleasures while friends matured. In retrospect, particularly after Season 4's painting revelation, the line recontextualized as denial, as Will insisting he wouldn't experience romantic feelings he was already developing for Mike. His dialogue predicted that he would fall in love, that his protestations were prophecy through contradiction, that his declarations of what he wouldn't do described exactly what he was doing. His dialogue across all seasons, his careful word choices when discussing feelings and relationships, operated as coded language that predicted his eventual coming out. His Season 4 conversation with Mike in the pizza parlor, his stumbling explanation of the painting's meaning, his tears as he described how Mike made his friends feel, all constituted thinly veiled confession. The dialogue predicted that Season 5 would need to make explicit what previous seasons had established through careful verbal dancing around the truth. Will's words had been predicting his homosexuality since Season 1. Audiences simply needed to learn to read his specific prophetic language. Eleven's vocabulary limitations throughout the series operated as prophecy of her identity journey and integration struggles. Her Season 1 vocabulary, consisting primarily of single words and short phrases, predicted that language acquisition would parallel her social development. Her Season 2 vocabulary expansion, learning more complex sentence structures and colloquialisms, predicted her increased connection to normal teenage life. Her Season 3 facility with slang and pop culture references, learned largely from Max, predicted that female friendship would accelerate her cultural literacy. Her Season 4 continued struggles with communication, particularly expressing complex emotions, predicted that language would remain site of difficulty even as her powers returned. Her specific phrases, the words she chose and repeated, carried prophetic weight. Her identification as 11 rather than Jane in early seasons predicted that she would struggle to fully embrace the identity Hopper wanted for her, that her lab designation would remain primary self-concept. Her eventual acceptance of Jane Hopper in legal documents, while maintaining L as chosen nickname, predicted compromise between past trauma and future identity, acknowledgement of both who she had been and who she was becoming. The dialogue around naming predicted Season 5's continued exploration of identity formation, the question of whether she would ultimately identify more with her laboratory origin or her adopted family. Steve Harrington's Season 3 dialogue about his dream future, his vision of having 6 little nuggets and driving cross-country in an RV with a large family, predicted both his desire for domestic happiness and the obstacles preventing it. His confession to Robin, delivered while drugged and vulnerable, revealed genuine yearning for family connection that contrasted with his actual romantic failures. The specific detail, 6 children, suggested that Steve's fantasies tended toward excess, that he imagined abundance because he had experienced emotional scarcity. The dialogue predicted that his search for partnership and family would continue through Season 5, that his role as babysitter was preparation for actual fatherhood he hadn't yet achieved. His line in Season 4 about seeing himself having a family with Nancy, his vision presented by Vecna of suburban domestic life, predicted that he still carried feelings for her despite their separation years earlier. However, Nancy's discomfort with this vision, her clear preference for journalism career over traditional domesticity, predicted that Steve would need to relinquish this specific dream. His dialogue had been predicting that what he wanted might not align with what others wanted from him, that his vision of future required finding a partner who shared rather than compromised his desires. Dustin Henderson's scientific explanations throughout the series operated as prophecy disguised as exposition. His Season 1 explanation of sensory deprivation tanks, his Season 2 biology lessons about D'Artagnan's anatomy, his Season 3 physics regarding Planck's constant, all predicted that scientific knowledge would prove crucial to solving supernatural problems. His dialogue established that understanding how things worked provided advantage in fights against entities that seemed to defy natural law. The Upside Down operated according to rules, even if those rules differed from baseline reality's physics. Dustin's consistent role as explainer predicted that Season 5's resolution would require scientific thinking, that magic would ultimately prove susceptible to systematic analysis and strategic application of discovered principles. His dialogue about Susie, his insistence on her existence before anyone had met her, predicted both that she was real and that his unlikely connections would consistently prove valuable. His radio communications, his emphasis on proper protocol and channel usage, predicted that communication technology would remain essential to coordinating group action. His catchphrases, particularly his signing off with elaborate radio operator terminology, established personality while predicting his role as communications hub in Season 4's multi-location narrative. His words connected separated friends, made collaboration possible across distance, fulfilled prophecy that language itself could bridge physical gaps. Joyce Byers' repeated declarations that she wasn't crazy, her insistence that others needed to believe her perceptions even when they seemed impossible, predicted that she would always be proven correct eventually. Her Season 1 conviction that Will was alive despite all evidence suggesting death, her Season 2 recognition that Will's episodes were supernatural rather than psychological, her Season 3 certainty that Magnet's failure indicated significant threat, all demonstrated that Joyce's instincts should be trusted immediately rather than questioned. Her dialogue predicted that maternal intuition would prove more reliable than scientific skepticism or official explanations, that the person who loved most deeply would perceive threats that others missed or dismissed. Her specific word choices, the way she articulated her certainties despite lacking concrete evidence, established her as prophet within the narrative structure. When Joyce said something was wrong, something was wrong. When she insisted on investigating despite others' dismissals, investigation always revealed actual threats. Her dialogue had been predicting its own vindication since Season 1, training audiences to trust her perceptions even when they seemed paranoid or unlikely. Season 5's prophecies suggested that Joyce would continue this pattern, that her final season warnings would again prove prescient despite potential skepticism from others. Nancy Wheeler's questions throughout the series, her journalistic interrogations and investigative instincts predicted both revelations she would uncover and career paths she would follow. Her Season 2 questions about Barb's death, her refusal to accept official explanations, predicted that she would become the group member most capable of researching historical context and uncovering hidden connections. Her Season 4 questions about Victor Creel, her systematic investigation of his history, predicted that she would be the one to discover Vecna's origin story. Her dialogue had consistently been predicting that asking the right questions mattered as much as finding answers. That investigation itself constituted heroism even when it didn't involve supernatural powers or physical combat. Her specific phrasing, the way she formulated inquiries, demonstrated increasingly sophisticated investigative technique across seasons. Her early questions were blunt, driven by emotion and determination. Her later questions showed strategic thinking, understanding of how to extract information from reluctant sources, recognition of which details mattered and which were misdirection. The evolution of her dialogue predicted her professional development, suggested that by series' end she would have developed journalist skills that would serve her throughout adult life. The questions she asked in high school predicted the questions she would ask as career investigative reporter, her dialogue forming through line from teenage curiosity to professional competence. Jonathan Byers' dialogue, less immediately prophetic than other characters, operated through what he didn't say as much as what he did. His silences, his tendency to observe rather than speak, predicted his role as photographer and witness. His few lengthy speeches, particularly his Season 1 defense of Will against Bully's cruelty, established his protective nature while predicting that he would consistently choose family loyalty over social acceptance. His Season 4 dialogue about feeling stuck, about college plans delayed by family responsibilities, predicted internal conflicts that Season 5 would need to address. Would he continue sacrificing his own ambitions for family needs, or would he eventually need to choose his own path, even if that meant disappointing those who depended on him? Dialogue prophecy. In Stranger Things operates through layers of meaning that accumulate across seasons. Obviously, prophetic statements, like Mike's D&D narrations, train audiences to watch for foreshadowing. Subtle verbal hints that gain significance only retroactively, like Will's declaration about not falling in love, reward attentive viewers while remaining accessible to casual audiences who absorb the setup without conscious recognition. Deep subtext that emerges only after future events provide context, like the full meaning of Hopper's letter or Bob's advice, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how dialogue can operate simultaneously as character development, immediate plot advancement, and long-term prophecy. The series demonstrates that words shape reality as surely as supernatural powers do. Characters predict their own fates, their friends' futures, and the narrative's trajectory through conversations that feel natural in the moment but prove prescient in retrospect. This dialogue architecture rewards rewatching, as lines that seemed throwaway or purely functional reveal themselves as careful predictions once audiences know what comes later. The prophetic dialogue system proves that the Duffer Brothers have planned their story comprehensively, that they embedded clues from the beginning, that no line was wasted or arbitrary. Every conversation mattered, every statement contained potential meaning, every word contributed to the series' prophetic structure. Beyond individual lines and specific conversations, Stranger Things has predicted character destinies through the careful construction of personal arcs that were evident from first appearances. Each member of the ensemble arrived carrying the seeds of their complete journey, personality traits, and background details that would determine their paths across multiple seasons of development and revelation. Each character arrived in Hawkins, or revealed themselves in Eleven's case, carrying within them the seeds of their complete journey. Stranger Things introduced its ensemble with precision, embedding in first impressions the destinies that would unfold across years. These personal prophecies demonstrate how character design predicts narrative arc as reliably as plot structure, how personality traits established in opening scenes determine paths through subsequent seasons of challenge and transformation. 11 emerged from the woods in Season 1's opening episodes as someone fundamentally displaced, wearing a hospital gown in the rain, her shaved head marking her as different, her limited vocabulary suggesting years of isolation and deprivation. This introduction contained her entire arc in compressed form. The search for family, evident in her immediate attachment to the boys who showed her kindness, would drive her relationships across 4 seasons. Her powers, demonstrated through small acts like moving Mike's action figures before escalating to disintegrating the Demogorgon, established the pattern of ability leading to exhaustion, of power requiring cost. Her vulnerability, despite supernatural strength, her need for protection, even as she protected others, predicted the complicated dynamic she would have with Hopper, with Mike, with everyone who tried to care for her, while also utilizing her abilities. Her language development across seasons followed trajectory predicted by her initial monosyllables. She learned communication through immersion, absorbing vocabulary and syntax from those around her, her speech patterns reflecting whoever she spent most time with. Mike's earnest directness in Season 1, Max's casual slang in Season 3, her increasing verbal sophistication predicted that she would eventually find her own voice, rather than merely echoing others. Her Season 4 struggles with self-expression, despite 4 years of language exposure, demonstrated that communication involved more than vocabulary acquisition, that expressing complex internal states required emotional development that didn't automatically accompany linguistic competence. Her power's trajectory, from Season 1's demonstrations through Season 3's loss to Season 4's recovery, fulfilled prophecies embedded in her initial displays. The nosebleeds that accompanied power use suggested physical limits that would eventually reach critical threshold. Her Season 1 finale disintegration, dissolving into particles after destroying the Demogorgon, predicted the exhaustion pattern that would recur across seasons. Power came with costs, abilities had limits, her supernatural strength couldn't protect her from consequences of its use. Season 3's power loss represented fulfillment of warnings embedded in every previous nosebleed, every moment of collapse after exertion. Her body had been predicting that it couldn't sustain this output indefinitely. Mike Wheeler's introduction as Dungeon Master, confidently narrating campaigns while orchestrating his friend's adventure, established him as natural leader whose authority derived from creativity rather than physical dominance or social status. His immediate devotion to Eleven, his protection of her from the first night she appeared in his basement, predicted the intensity that would characterize their relationship. His willingness to lie to his parents, to hide her despite risks, demonstrated that he would prioritize personal loyalty over institutional authority or parental rules. This characteristic would recur across seasons, Mike consistently choosing his friends over safety, relationship over caution, emotional connection over rational self-preservation. His insecurities about his place in the group, his fear of losing Eleven, his need for romantic partnership to validate his identity, all emerged from his Season 1 behaviour. He was the friend who tried hardest to keep everyone together, who took others' absences most personally, who struggled most with change and separation. His Season 3 and 4 difficulties with expressing love directly, his inability to say "I love you" to Eleven without extreme circumstances forcing the admission, fulfilled prophecies about emotional availability that were evident from his initial characterization. He loved deeply, but struggled to communicate that love through words rather than actions. His devotion, obvious to viewers, but requiring constant reassurance for the object of his affection. Will Byers' introduction through absence, present primarily through others' descriptions before his actual appearance, established him as character, defined by others' perceptions and protective impulses. He was the sensitive one, the artistic one, the one who needed defending from bullies and rescuing from monsters. His actual personality, revealed gradually across Season 1's flashbacks and Season 2's trauma recovery, demonstrated kindness, creativity, and emotional awareness that made him vulnerable in Hawkins' hostile environment. His artistic talent, his drawing and painting, predicted that he would process experiences visually, that his perception would operate through imagery rather than purely verbal articulation. His sexuality, suggested through implications from Season 1 forward, became increasingly central to his character across subsequent seasons. His difference from other boys, coded initially through bullies' homophobic slurs, and his lack of interest in conventionally masculine activities, suggested identity struggles beyond supernatural trauma. His Season 3 outburst about not wanting to grow up, his resistance to his friends' romantic interests in girls, his destruction of Castle Byers in frustrated rage, all pointed towards someone recognizing that he couldn't follow the developmental path his friends were taking. His Season 4 painting, his tearful conversation with Mike, his attribution of his own feelings to Eleven, represented someone unable to come out directly, but equally unable to completely hide his truth. The prophecy embedded in Will's initial characterization suggested that his complete arc would require addressing his sexuality explicitly, that the subtext that had accumulated across 4 seasons would need to become text in the final season. His journey from missing boy to possessed victim to sensitive friend to closeted teenager followed logical progression, each season adding layer to character introduced primarily through his absence. His destiny, predicted by everything from his artistic sensitivity to his social outsider status to his deep connection with Mike, pointed toward eventual self-acceptance and honest expression of identity he had been protecting and hiding. Dustin Henderson's introduction as the anxious friend, the one concerned about his missing teeth and social standing, the scientifically curious member who could explain biological and physical phenomena, established his dual role as comic relief and intellectual resource. His enthusiasm for knowledge, his excitement about learning and explaining, predicted that he would become the group's researcher and strategist. His social awkwardness, his difficulty fitting in with conventional peer groups, predicted that he would find connection through shared interests rather than social performance, that his relationship with Susie would develop through ham radio communication before physical presence, his loyalty to friends despite their occasional dismissal of his contributions, his persistence in the face of ridicule or doubt predicted that he would be the one who maintained group cohesion across geographic separation. His Season 4 role as communications hub, coordinating action across Hawkins and California through radio networks, fulfilled prophecies about his essential function. He connected others, translated between different social and intellectual registers, provided information and emotional support that held disparate elements together. His grief over Eddie's death, his assumption of responsibility for informing Wayne Munson about his nephew's heroism, demonstrated the emotional depth beneath his comic exterior, fulfilling suggestions from his initial characterization that his humor masked genuine feeling rather than replacing it. Lucas Sinclair's introduction as the pragmatic skeptic, the friend most likely to question plans and point out flaws, established him as voice of reason whose caution would be consistently overruled by others' faith or desperation. His arc across 4 seasons involved learning when skepticism served the group and when it became obstacle to necessary action. His Season 1 distrust of Eleven, his suspicion that she was dangerous or unreliable, gave way to acceptance once she proved herself through sacrifice. This pattern predicted his character development, someone whose initial resistance eventually transformed into fierce loyalty once trust was earned. His Season 3 and 4 pursuit of basketball success and social acceptance, his attempt to integrate into conventional school hierarchies, represented struggle between authentic self and performed identity. His relationship with Max grounded him, her acceptance of his nerd identity, allowing him to maintain connection to both worlds without fully committing to either. His Season 4 choice to side with his friends despite social consequences, his abandonment of basketball championship to fight Vecna, fulfilled the prophecy that when forced to choose, he would prioritize genuine relationships over social performance. His introduction had predicted this trajectory, his skepticism always serving protective function rather than actual rejection of his friends. Max Mayfield arrived in Season 2 as the California transplant, skateboarding with aggressive confidence that masked profound vulnerability. Her initial resistance to the party's friendship, her defensive hostility, predicted the walls she would need to maintain to protect herself from further hurt. Her backstory, revealed gradually through scenes with Billy and her mother, showed that her toughness derived from necessity, that her independence was survival strategy rather than preference. Her actual desire for connection, evident despite her protestations, predicted that she would eventually allow others in once she trusted they wouldn't abandon or hurt her. Her relationship with Billy, the abusive stepbrother whose cruelty toward her stemmed from his own victimization, established trauma that Season 4 would explore through Vecna's targeting. Her guilt over Billy's death, her feeling that she should have done more to save him despite the impossibility of that burden, predicted the depression and isolation that would make her vulnerable to psychic attack. Her Season 2 introduction contained her Season 4 crisis in seed form. The girl who arrived pushing everyone away would eventually need to accept that connection offered survival rather than weakness, that letting people love her provided protection against threats both internal and supernatural. Her relationship with Eleven, their Season 3 friendship providing her first close female bond, predicted that women's relationships would prove as important as romantic partnerships. Their shopping montages and sleepovers, their mutual rejection of Mike and Lucas's attention in favor of their own company, established female friendship as source of joy and strength. This bond predicted Max's Season 4 desperation for Eleven's help, Eleven's determination to save Max from Vecna's control, their relationship's evolution from casual friendship to life-or-death mutual devotion. Max's initial characterization as someone simultaneously seeking and fearing connection prophesied her complete arc from isolated newcomer to integrated friend, whose survival mattered desperately to multiple people. Steve Harrington's introduction as Nancy's boyfriend, the popular jock with perfect hair and conventional attractiveness, seemed to position him as temporary character, obstacle to Nancy and Jonathan's connection, rather than central figure in his own right. His initial behaviour supported this reading. His jealousy, his cruelty toward Jonathan, his performance of toxic masculinity, all suggested limited depth and likely elimination from the narrative once Nancy outgrew him. Yet hints of capacity for growth appeared even in early episodes. His genuine affection for Nancy, his discomfort with his friend's behaviour, even as he participated, his eventual recognition that he had acted badly, all predicted transformation that would span multiple seasons. His redemption began in Season 1's finale, when he returned to help fight the Demogorgon, despite having every reason to leave and protect himself. This moment predicted his complete arc. He would consistently choose to help despite personal cost, would protect those weaker than himself, would find purpose through service rather than status. His evolution into the babysitter, the older brother figure for Dustin, Lucas, and the younger kids, fulfilled prophecies embedded in his initial characterization. Beneath the popular exterior existed someone capable of genuine care, someone whose leadership could manifest through protection rather than domination, someone who could value others more than his own reputation or safety. His romantic failures across seasons, his loss of Nancy, followed by his continued inability to find lasting partnership, predicted character arc centered on learning to find value beyond romantic success. The former popular kid, who had always had girlfriends, needed to discover identity independent of romantic validation. His Season 4 confession about his dream future, his vision of large family and domestic happiness, suggested that his search continued, but that he had clarified what he actually wanted rather than performing desires expected of him. His introduction had predicted this entire journey, the jerk with hidden depth who would need to shed protective layers to reveal the genuinely good person beneath performance of conventional masculinity. Nancy Wheeler's introduction as popular girl dating Steve, seemingly conforming to expected feminine roles while privately wanting something different, contained her complete arc in compressed form. Her navigation of parental expectations, social hierarchies, and personal desires established tensions that would define her character. Her friendship with Barb, the less conventionally attractive friend, who was killed while Nancy pursued romantic interests, created guilt that would drive Nancy's actions for seasons. Her determination to expose the truth about Barb's death, her refusal to accept cover stories or move on without justice, predicted that she would become the group's investigative warrior, someone who fought monsters, both literal and institutional. Her weapon proficiency, demonstrated across multiple seasons, fulfilled suggestions from her Season 1 willingness to arm herself despite fear. She learned to shoot, to fight, to strategize, becoming comfortable with violence when necessary for protection or justice. Her journalistic ambitions, evident from her Season 2 work on the school newspaper, predicted career path that would use her investigative skills and moral clarity professionally. Her Season 4 role discovering Vecna's origin story through systematic research fulfilled prophecies about her function in the group. She was the one who would uncover backstories, who would find historical patterns, who would pursue truth regardless of personal danger or social consequences. Her romantic relationships, complicated and evolving, predicted struggles between conventional expectations and authentic desires. Her choice of Jonathan over Steve represented selection of substance over surface, of genuine connection over social advantage. Yet her Season 4 hesitations about their future together suggested that even authentic choice required ongoing evaluation, that relationships needed active maintenance and honest communication to survive into adulthood. Her introduction, as someone navigating competing pressures and desires, predicted lifetime of balancing personal wants against others' expectations, of choosing difficult truth over comfortable conformity. Jonathan Byers arrived as the artistic outsider, the poor kid with the camera who documented rather than participated, whose economic circumstances and family situation placed him at Hawkins's social margins. His introduction through photography, his tendency to observe from distance, predicted his role as witness and documenter, his immediate prioritization of family over personal interests, his assumption of parental responsibilities for Will while Joyce worked, established pattern of self-sacrifice that would recur across seasons. His love for his brother, fierce and protective, predicted that family loyalty would consistently supersede other considerations, including his own ambitions and desires. His romance with Nancy developed through their shared investigation in Season 1, their partnership of equals rather than traditional courtship rituals. This origin predicted their relationship's strengths and weaknesses. They worked well together, respected each other's capabilities, shared values about truth and justice. However, his insecurities about economic disparities, his sense that Nancy came from different worlds with different opportunities, predicted tensions that would emerge as they contemplated futures requiring either compromise or separation. His introduction as someone whose circumstances limited his choices, whose talent and intelligence couldn't overcome structural disadvantages, prophesied adult struggles with feeling trapped by responsibilities and obligations that others didn't face. Joyce Byers's Joyce. Introduction. As frantic mother insisting her missing son was alive, communicating through Christmas lights, while others dismissed her as hysterical, established her as the character whose intuition would consistently prove correct despite skepticism. Her refusal to accept easy explanations, her persistence in pursuing truth that others found too uncomfortable or unlikely to believe, predicted her role across all seasons. When Joyce said something was wrong, something was wrong. Her maternal instinct operated as supernatural sense, detecting threats and perceiving realities that others missed. Her working-class struggles, her economic vulnerability, her position as single mother managing overwhelming circumstances all contributed to strength born from necessity rather than privilege. Her relationship with Hopper, developing across multiple seasons from antagonistic to romantic, predicted that she would eventually find partnership with someone who understood loss and trauma, whose damage matched her own in ways that created possibility for mutual healing. Her Season 3 resistance to his romantic overtures, her fear of replacing Bob's memory or risking further loss, gave way to Season 4's desperate determination to rescue him from Russian imprisonment. Her introduction had predicted this arc. Someone whose capacity for love remained intact despite repeated trauma, whose willingness to fight for those she cared about would prove limitless, regardless of obstacles or odds. Hopper's introduction as the alcoholic small-town police chief, divorced and traumatized by his daughter's death, contained prophecies about redemption and paternal devotion that would define his character. His Season 1 investigation of Will's disappearance, his eventual belief in Joyce's supernatural explanations, despite his initial skepticism, predicted his evolution from dismissive authority figure to active participant in defending Hawkins from interdimensional threats. His backstory, revealed through careful flashbacks to Sarah's illness and death, established that his isolation and substance abuse stemmed from unbearable loss, that beneath his rough exterior existed someone broken by inability to save his child. His adoption of 11 fulfilled prophecies embedded in those flashbacks. He needed to protect a child, needed to prove that he could save someone, even if he couldn't save Sarah. His overprotective restrictions, his struggles with allowing 11 independence, his difficulty expressing love, except through control, all derived from trauma that his introduction had established. His apparent death in Season 3, his actual survival in Russian imprisonment, his Season 4 return, transformed by suffering, completed arc predicted by his initial characterization. He was always going to sacrifice himself for those he loved, was always going to suffer for his devotion, was always going to survive through sheer, stubborn refusal to abandon those who needed him. Robin Buckley arrived in TI's Season 3 as Steve's co-worker, the band nerd whose intelligence and wit contrasted with his social ease. Her initial antagonism toward him, her pointed comments about his popularity and privilege, predicted that their relationship would develop through honesty rather than performance. Her linguistic skills, demonstrated through her translation of Russian transmissions, established her practical competence. Her awkwardness, her tendency to ramble when nervous, humanized her intelligence, showing that brilliance didn't require social polish or conventional confidence. Her coming out scene with Steve, her revelation about Tammy Thompson while they sat in mall bathroom after Russian torture, represented television's rare, authentic portrayal of sexuality discussion between queer person and straight friend. Her fear that disclosure would end their friendship, Steve's immediate acceptance without drama or extended processing, predicted that the show would handle LGBTQ+ representation with warmth and normalcy. Her Season 4 crush on Vicky, their tentative flirtation, fulfilled prophecies about her romantic life, continuing beyond her coming out to include actual relationship possibility. Her introduction had predicted this trajectory, someone whose queerness would be normalized rather than sensationalized, whose identity would be treated as unremarkable aspect of her character rather than defining characteristic requiring constant attention. Eddie Munson's Season 4 introduction as Hawkins High's theatrical dungeon master, the metalhead freak who sold drugs and led Hellfire Club, positioned him as apparent antagonist before revealing him as hero. His dramatic monologue about conformity and social persecution, his defense of outcasts and misfits, established values that would drive his actions across the season. His fear after witnessing Chrissy's death, his flight and hiding, seemed to confirm his self-identification as coward. Yet his care for the younger Hellfire members, his loyalty to his Uncle Wayne, his genuine kindness beneath performative rebellion, all predicted that circumstances would reveal courage he didn't believe he possessed. His death fulfilled tragic prophecy embedded in his introduction. He was seasonal character, someone introduced specifically for one season's arc, marked for death through the show's established pattern of sacrificing lovable newcomers. His insistence that he always ran predicted through ironic foreshadowing that he would ultimately stand his ground. His love of music, his guitar skills, his theatrical performance style all converged in his final moments when he played Master of Puppets in the Upside Down, drawing demobats away from his friends. His introduction had contained his ending, the character who called himself coward, prophesying his own heroism through self-deprecation, the outcast predicting through his values and actions that he would die protecting others. Character prophecy proves perhaps the series' most sophisticated prediction system. While plot foreshadowing requires careful planning, character arc prediction demands understanding human psychology and growth patterns. Stranger Things introduced each member of its ensemble fully formed, with personalities containing inherent trajectories towards specific destinations. The scared girl from the lab would search for family and identity. The sensitive boy would struggle with sexuality and belonging. The popular jerk would transform through service and sacrifice. These personal prophecies, embedded in characterization from first appearances, demonstrated that the show predicted not just events, but the humans who would face them. Character became destiny, became fulfilled prediction, individual journeys following paths encoded in initial presentations. The series demonstrating sophisticated understanding that who people are determines where they go as surely as plot mechanics or narrative requirements. Beyond individual characters and specific plot points, Stranger Things has predicted its own story through meta-narrative patterns, through structural choices and genre conventions and storytelling architecture that telegraph future developments. These framework-level prophecies show a series conscious of its own mythology, building toward conclusions encoded in its very structure. Stranger Things operates with full awareness of its own narrative architecture, using structural patterns and genre conventions not just as storytelling tools, but as prophetic systems. The series' meta-narrative, its consciousness of being a story, creates prediction layers that transcend individual plot points. These framework-level prophecies reveal a show engineering its own destiny through deliberate structural choices, through format decisions and pacing rhythms that telegraph futures as clearly as any dialogue or visual symbol. The episode count variation across seasons carried its own prophetic meaning. Season 1's 8 episodes established baseline structure, compact storytelling that introduced characters and mythology efficiently while building toward climactic confrontation. Season 2's expansion to 9 episodes predicted that the series would adjust format to serve narrative needs rather than conforming to rigid structures. The additional episode allowed for the Lost Sister, the controversial interlude that transported Eleven to Chicago and expanded the universe beyond Hawkins. This structural flexibility predicted Season 3's return to 8 episodes, demonstrating tighter pacing for summer action, and Season 4's massive expansion to 18 episodes split across 2 volumes. The show's willingness to vary its fundamental structure predicted that Season 5 would similarly determine its own shape based on conclusion requirements, rather than industry standards or audience expectations. Season 4's volume split, creating month-long gap between episodes 7 and 8, represented unprecedented structural choice that predicted how streaming narratives might manipulate time itself as storytelling element. The wait between volumes, longer than typical week-to-week broadcast gaps, but shorter than full season gaps, created unique anticipation that traditional formats couldn't achieve. This timing allowed audiences to process Volume 1's revelations, to speculate about Henry Creel's significance, to prepare emotionally for Volume 2's extended episodes and devastating climaxes. The structural choice predicted that Season 5 might employ similar strategies, might release in stages, or create deliberate gaps that enhanced rather than interrupted narrative experience. The individual episode structures followed patterns that predicted pacing and revelation placement with remarkable consistency. Episodes typically opened with cold opens that either continued previous cliffhangers or introduced new complications through scenes disconnected from main characters' immediate awareness. These openings trained audiences to expect important information in first minutes, established that the show would provide context before diving into character reactions. The pattern predicted that key revelations would often arrive before main titles, that the series would front-load significance rather than building slowly toward end episode hooks. The series deployed cliffhangers with strategic precision, understanding when to create suspense through unresolved questions and when to provide satisfaction through completed arcs. Season finales consistently concluded major storylines while opening new questions. Season 1 ended with Eleven's apparent death, but Will's return suggested through his bathroom coughing. Season 2 concluded with Mind Flayer apparently expelled, but the final shot revealed its continued presence. Season 3 closed Hopper's story with apparent death, but the mid-credits scene suggested survival. Season 4 ended with gates converging, but left Max's consciousness missing. This pattern predicted that Season 5's conclusion would need to provide definitive closure, while potentially leaving some elements open to interpretation, balancing satisfying resolution against the series' established preference for complicated endings. Genre conventions borrowed from 1980s films that inspired the series operated as prophetic framework. The Duffer Brothers acknowledged influences, particularly Steven Spielberg's suburban adventures, John Carpenter's horror, and Stephen King's small-town supernatural fiction, predicted narrative choices through their deployment of recognizable tropes. The child adventurers on bikes, the government conspiracy, the small-town hiding dark secrets, all carried expectations that the show could fulfill, subvert, or complicate. The series predicted its own moves by establishing which genre conventions it would honor and which it would deliberately violate. The coming-of-age elements, the transition from childhood innocence to adolescent awareness to young adult responsibility, followed predictable developmental arcs that the show accelerated through supernatural crisis. Characters who began as 12-year-olds playing games in basements would necessarily mature across seasons, their concerns shifting from bicycles and Halloween costumes to romance and identity and future planning. This generic expectation predicted that later seasons would grapple with different emotional and psychological territory than early seasons, that the series would need to evolve tonally to match its aging cast and characters. The horror genre's conventions created expectations about mortality and danger that the show manipulated strategically. Horror narratives typically kill expendable characters while protecting protagonists, creating tension through threat rather than actual loss. Stranger Things honored this convention through its first 3 seasons, allowing main cast to survive while sacrificing supporting characters like Bob, Barb, Billy, and Alexei. Season 4's placement of Max in coma, technically alive but functionally lost, represented the series testing boundaries of convention, suggesting that Season 5 might fully violate the protection typically afforded to original cast members. The pattern predicted escalating mortality, movement from protecting everyone to sacrificing newcomers to potentially losing core characters. The musical montages deployed throughout the series followed structural patterns that predicted emotional peaks and narrative transitions. These sequences, typically featuring period-appropriate pop music over images of characters in various locations processing events or preparing for action, served as breathing room between intense scenes while advancing time and emotional development. Season 1's Should I Stay or Should I Go connected Will to Jonathan across dimensions. Season 2's Snowball montage provided romantic resolutions for multiple pairings. Season 3's mall shopping sequence with Material Girl offered levity before darkness intensified. Season 4's Running Up That Hill became central to plot rather than purely atmospheric, elevating the montage convention to narrative necessity. This evolution predicted that music would continue gaining importance, that Season 5 might deploy songs not just as emotional underscore, but as actual plot elements. The series had been predicting through its musical choices that sound itself carried power, that the right song at the right moment could literally save lives. That emotional resonance translated into supernatural protection. The montages trained audiences to recognize these moments as significant, as breaks in normal narrative flow that allowed for reflection and emotional processing before returning to crisis. Episode titles carried their own prophetic weight, often referencing the content in ways that seemed obvious only after viewing. Season 1's The Vanishing of Will Byers announced its concern directly. The monster referred simultaneously to the Demogorgon and to humans whose actions proved monstrous. The Upside Down named the dimension while suggesting inverted expectations and reversed fortunes. Season 4's Dear Billy seemed simple address before revealing itself as Max's letter and her survival through connection. The titles predicted content while operating as interpretive lenses, suggesting how audiences should understand episodes' meanings beyond surface plot. The anthology versus serial tension within the show's structure predicted long-term planning while allowing seasonal variations. Each season functioned as complete story with beginning, middle, and end, allowing casual viewers to engage with individual seasons without requiring comprehensive knowledge of all previous events. However, the accumulating mythology, the references and callbacks, the character development across multiple years rewarded serial viewing and attention to detail. This dual structure predicted that Season 5 would need to satisfy both casual viewers seeking resolution to Season 4's cliffhangers and dedicated fans tracking foreshadowing from Season 1. The party's consistent victory, through collaboration rather than individual heroism, established structural pattern that predicted how final confrontations would resolve. No single character could defeat supernatural threats alone. Eleven's powers proved insufficient without strategic support. Knowledge without ability to act on it provided no advantage. The pattern established that winning required combining everyone's strengths, that isolation led to failure, while cooperation enabled survival. This structural principle predicted Season 5's climax would necessarily involve all main characters contributing their specific abilities toward unified goal, rather than relying on single hero to save everyone. The separation and reunion pattern recurred across seasons with increasing complexity. Characters scattered at season ends, reunited at beginnings, or gradually across episodes. Season 1 separated the party when Elle disappeared. Season 2 kept them together but isolated Elle in Hopper's cabin. Season 3 separated them geographically when the Byers moved. Season 4 split the cast across multiple locations for nearly the entire season. This escalating separation predicted that Season 5 would either continue the pattern toward even greater dispersal or reverse it entirely, bringing everyone together for sustained final confrontation after seasons of increasing geographic and emotional distance. The escalation pattern, each season raising stakes and expanding scope, followed predictable trajectory that suggested Season 5's parameters. Season 1's threat was local, contained to Hawkins. Season 2 expanded to tunnels beneath the entire town. Season 3 added international dimensions through Russian involvement. Season 4 split action across multiple states, while revealing that threats originated decades earlier than previously understood. This expansion predicted that Season 5 would address global implications, that the upside-down spread beyond Hawkins would require confronting questions about worldwide impact and response. The cyclical nature of invasions, gates closing and reopening with regularity, established patterns suggesting that permanent solutions required different approaches than previous temporary victories. Each season's climax closed gates or defeated immediate manifestations while leaving root causes unaddressed. The Mind Flayer's persistence across seasons despite multiple defeats demonstrated that symptoms could be treated, but disease remained. This pattern predicted that Season 5 would need to address fundamental causes rather than current symptoms, would need to seal dimensional barriers permanently, or acknowledge that coexistence with the upside down had become inevitable reality, requiring management rather than elimination. The narrative rhythm alternated between action and character development, between supernatural confrontation and domestic drama, creating pattern that maintained emotional engagement across extended storytelling. Episodes featuring intense battle sequences were typically followed by quieter character-focused episodes, allowing processing and relationship development. This pacing predicted that even Season 5's climactic final episodes would incorporate character moments alongside action, that the series would maintain its commitment to emotional truth, even during apocalyptic confrontation. The use of time skips between seasons, advancing the calendar several months to a year, allowed characters to age naturally while providing narrative advantages. Off-screen development created mysteries and changes that episodes could reveal gradually. Relationships evolved or dissolved between seasons. Characters processing trauma had time to reach different emotional states. This structural choice predicted that epilogues or post-victory sequences would employ similar temporal distance, that the series would show aftermath weeks, months, or years after final battle rather than ending immediately following climax. The hero's journey structure, Joseph Campbell's monomyth adapted to ensemble cast, operated as overarching framework predicting major beats. Characters left ordinary worlds, faced trials, achieved transformation, returned change to their communities. Eleven's journey from laboratory to family followed this pattern most clearly, but all main characters underwent variations. This structural template predicted that Season 5 would complete the journey, would return characters to ordinary world, transformed by their experiences, would show how heroes functioned after heroism was no longer required. The show's self-awareness about genre and narrative convention, its willingness to reference its influences directly while creating original combinations of familiar elements, predicted that it would continue honoring traditions while subverting expectations. Characters discussed movies and books that inspired the series, making intertextual connections explicit. This meta-awareness suggested that the Duffer Brothers understood prophecy as function of genre literacy, that audiences could predict futures by recognizing patterns from stories past. The series taught viewers to read its language by teaching them to read genre languages more broadly. The structural prophecy extended to production decisions beyond pure narrative. The decision to release all episodes simultaneously on Netflix rather than weekly on broadcast television affected how audiences experienced and discussed the show. Binge viewing allowed different engagement than week-to-week anticipation. The structure predicted that Season 5 might experiment with release strategies, might use format itself as tool for managing audience experience and cultural conversation. The show's budget increases across seasons, visible in production values and scope of set pieces, predicted narrative expansion from intimate character drama to epic confrontation. Early seasons' modest effects and limited locations gave way to massive upside-down sequences, elaborate Russian sets, extended underwater scenes, and complex battle choreography. This production evolution predicted that Season 5 would marshal even greater resources toward spectacular conclusion, that the final season's scale would dwarf previous seasons' scope, while maintaining focus on character relationships that grounded spectacle in emotional stakes. Meta-narrative prophecy represents the series' most sophisticated, predictive layer. By operating with full genre awareness and structural consciousness, Stranger Things creates self-fulfilling prophecies encoded in its very architecture. 8 episodes predict intimate character focus, while 18 allow broader scope. Horror conventions predict death and sacrifice, while coming-of-age tropes promise growth and hope. Musical montages predict emotional processing, while episode structures predict revelation timing. These structural predictions demonstrate a series that has, from its inception, known not just where it was going but how it would get there, what formal strategies it would employ, what audience expectations it would meet or complicate. The framework became the prediction became the reality, structure determining content as surely as content determined structure. As our exploration through Stranger Things' prophetic architecture approaches its conclusion, patterns emerge that illuminate not just how the show predicts its own plot, but why this predictive structure matters. These carefully planted seeds, visual symbols, dialogue prophecies, character destinies, and structural frameworks combine into a comprehensive system that rewards attention and demonstrates that the best stories know their destinations from their very first steps. And so our exploration concludes where it began, with understanding that stories contain within themselves the seeds of their own futures. Stranger Things has demonstrated across 4 seasons and approaching its 5th that the best narratives operate as prophecies. Every flickering light predicted future communication across dimensions. Every D&D campaign narrated real threats waiting to manifest. Every character introduction contained complete arc trajectories. Every visual symbol accumulated meaning across years. The show has trained its audience to read its language of prediction, creating viewing experience that rewards attention to detail, pattern recognition, and faith in careful storytelling. These prophecies, visual and verbal, structural and personal, combine into a series that has known its destination since that first vanishing in November 1983. The predictions proved the story was crafted, not merely written. Every breadcrumb led somewhere. Every seed bloomed. Every Christmas light that flickered in Joyce Byers' living room pointed toward Max's salvation through Kate Bush's ascending chords, toward Will's return from the upside down, toward Eleven's learned communication with those who loved her. As you drift towards sleep, dear listener, carry with you the comfort of stories that know their paths, that guide with intention, that predict their own victories over darkness. The prophecies have shown us that attention matters, that details reward careful observation, that nothing is arbitrary when artists care deeply about their craft. Sweet dreams await, filled with flickering Christmas lights, opening gates, and the promise that careful attention to patterns reveals futures hidden in plain sight.